Let's get peppy. Welcome to PEP 159. That's PEP or Planet Extra Podcast. It's an offshoot of Planet America on ABC Australia, which you can see on Wednesdays at 10 p.m. on ABC TV and 8 p.m. on Fridays on ABC News, or anytime you like on iView or Facebook at ABC Planet America, or on YouTube on the ABC News In-Depth channel. On PEP, we cover all the stuff that is too nerdy for TV. If you're listening to us, you can also find PEP on YouTube and Facebook, where you'll also find timestamps, not time signatures. Thank you very much, Correspondence, who pointed out to me. It's timestamps. It's not musical. And show notes in the blurb. And if you leave a comment under those videos, we are likely to see it. You can also tweet us at PEPCHASDRDAVE. That's at PEPChazDrDave. If you want to contact me privately, ask me on Twitter and I will allow you to direct message or email me. It might take me a little bit of time to get back to you on those emails. There are a few people who have emailed me and I've been taking my time. I'm sorry. I will get to you. I promise. But for now, a special guest PEPcaster who I've literally never, ever in my life seen raise the stakes of inconsequential views. In fact, she's the direct opposite of that. We're talking about Melina Wicks. Hello, Melina.
Hello.
Thank you so much for joining us, Melina. Dr. Dave is, he's not sick, he's away. So thank you for stepping in. This is a Thursday we're recording this. This is 4:24 p.m. in Sydney on a Thursday, the 23rd of May. So some of what we're talking about is going to be 24 hours old by the time this comes out. In fact, all of it will be at least 24 hours old. I stopped reading at 2 a.m. yesterday morning, so some of the stuff will be 2 days old by the time you listen to this. So just be aware of that. But Melina, what are you grateful for at this fine hour?
Ooh, I am grateful for the NBA playoffs.
Do tell.
I am a big NBA fan. Love it in general, but anyone who knows the regular season is very long and everyone always says it's the playoffs that matters. And we're in the middle of the playoffs now, and it's been a really, really good one. I've been just genuinely loving it. Like, I am genuinely grateful for how much I've enjoyed it this year for a couple of reasons. The first is that my team, which is the Knicks, which is not as embarrassing to say as it used to be a few years ago, yes, has been quite good lately. I've suffered through many torturous years of them playing really, really terrible basketball. This year, they were the number 2 seed in the East. They got to Game 7 in the second round of the playoffs. They were just eliminated the other day. But kind of asterisk because they had a comical amount of injuries. Like, if you would say like the 8 best players on the team, by the end of the second round, 3 were out for the season. 2 had suffered really significant injuries. Another had a slightly less significant injury, and the star player broke his hand in Game 7. So it was basically like if the Black Knight and Monty Python was a basketball team, it would be the New York Knicks this year. So, but they played really well. Like, they just kept going, and they played just really lovely, competent basketball all postseason. So I think they would have gone far had it not been for that. And they are out now, but of the 4 teams remaining, because we're in the conference finals now, there's another team that I really, really like that I think is a legit shot to win it all.
And who's that?
That's the Minnesota Timberwolves. So I have my team, and then teams that I actively really like, teams I can take or leave, and teams I hate. The Timberwolves have been a team I've actively liked for many years. Particularly their kind of long-running star player, Karl Anthony Towns, is just really likable player. And then they drafted a few years ago this other player, Anthony Edwards, who's only 22 years old. But, you know, like, to win a championship, you need a player who's like that guy. Just has that extra insane quality where they can lead a team. He's only 22 years old, and he is incredible. And he is driving this team beyond everyone's expectations. They just beat the defending champions, the Denver Nuggets, in Game 7 in the second round the other day, with the biggest comeback in a Game 7 in NBA history. They had a 30-point turnaround in Game 7.
That's a big comeback.
It's a big comeback. They lost Game 1 today to the Mavs, which is my least favorite team in the NBA, but I still believe. So now I'm all in on them. They're a really fun team. They're a young team. They're just really overperforming, and I kind of think they have what it takes to win the whole thing. So there's been just a lot of really exciting games, really fun matchups, like really high quality games, and I'm just loving it. So I'm grateful for that. Well,
look, I'm excited to hear about the Timberwolves because I just like their mascot, the Timberwolf. I like that. I like an original vicious animal because that's what they're supposed to be. They're meant to be vicious animals, these mascots. And too often they're just ephemeral things like the Jazz or the Magic.
Well, or the Lakers, which is what the Minnesota team used to be before it moved to LA, which doesn't make sense.
Well, it doesn't make sense, but even when it was in Minnesota, it was still ridiculous and a stupid idea for a mascot. Lakers. So as Timberwolf, that is original and that is hardcore and that's not embarrassing. It's not like a swan. It should be the kind of thing that your mascot is.
Or a leprechaun, which is who they'll probably face if they make the finals.
There you go. Exactly. So I'm backing the Timberwolves just because of their mascot. So I'm glad to hear that, Melina. Okay, I'll tell you what I'm grateful for. I'm grateful for Courtney Gore. That's not going to be a name that wouldn't mean anything to me if you asked me 2 days ago. But I read a story about Courtney Gore and I liked it a lot. I'm going to put it in the homework, in the blurb. If you have a link, if you have a look in the link there in the blurbs underneath the video, and in fact on the audio podcast too. It's a ProPublica story about Courtney Gore, a school board member in a deep red county in Texas. She is a co-host of a right-wing online talk show. She used to be really big on school board issues, like a lot of right-wing mums are. And she decided to do something about it. She decided to run for the school board to get to the bottom of all that was going on and the sexualization of our children and the wokeness. And all that. She decided, okay, well, I'm not going to just whinge. I'm going to try and fix it. Good on her. So she did. And she said, there's a quote from her when she was running, "Over the years, our American education system has been hijacked by leftists looking to indoctrinate our kids into the progressive way of thinking. And yes, they've tried to do this in Granbury ISD." Granbury is where she's from. "I can't sit by and watch their twisted worldview infiltrate Granbury ISD." Yeah, good luck to her, as far as I'm concerned. That's what democracy's about. But then she took office, and lo and behold, she actually did the work. She actually, in her spare, she's not being paid for this. In her spare time, like in after hours, she's going through thousands of pages of syllabuses and lesson preparations and preparation lessons and all this kind of stuff, and the lesson plans. Sorry, and what she found was that, lo and behold, it was all bullshit. What she thought was happening was not happening. Children were not being sexualized. There was no critical race theory in primary school. She found, there's a quote from her, the materials taught children, quote, "how to be a good friend and a good human." That's what she found. and so she went on Facebook, where she came from, and she said, "Look what I found. This is all good. There's no problem in the school district." And her allies didn't want to hear it. She thought they'd be relieved to hear there was no problem. They were not relieved. She's a bit naive, old Courtney. They were indifferent. In fact, dismissive, even hostile. And so then she decided to go public with this in a big way. And she launched a whole series of Facebook posts saying this is all a hoax, this is all bullshit. Like, this is the truth. I'm telling you the truth about schools. And that did not go down well. She admitted she was wrong. She told residents that her backers had used divisive rhetoric to manipulate the community's emotions. They were interested not in improving public education, she said, but rather in sowing distrust. And eventually she allied with the woman that she'd ousted from the school board, a woman named Nancy Alana. She got together with her and helped get her elected again because she realized that there's nothing wrong with this woman at all. And this is a quote from Nancy Alana. She let everybody know she'd been misled and that she is seeing for herself the good things that are happening in our school district, that the school board can be trusted, that the administrators can be trusted, and she's spoken out on that, and that's made a big difference. And she's very well thought of in our community because of her willingness to step up and say, "I was wrong." That may be the case, but she's not well thought of in her community. She has been threatened repeatedly. She's been shunned by her ex-friends, and now her life is not great. But she's feeling good about herself, that she is doing the right thing. And I feel grateful for her because that is the hardest thing to do in politics. Number one, to be part of a group, turn your back on your group, and not for fat MSNBC contracts, for nothing. She's getting nothing out of this. She's not even getting paid. She's getting absolutely nothing. She knows no reward. She's doing it out of principle. And she's doing hard work, trying to get to the bottom of all this kind of stuff and trying to do good. And she's getting zero reward. In fact, the opposite. She's been punished. And I am grateful that people like Courtney Gore still exist, because that is what you need to make a democracy work. So, well done. So, anyway, let's get into the correspondence. I'm going to rattle through these. I'm going to try to make correspondence a little bit shorter than it has been. I know I made it shorter recently than it was before. I'm going to make it shorter again because I thought 35 minutes was a bit too much last week. Anyway, Worms correspondence. Alexander writes, in this episode, you linked the immunosuppressive effects of some intestinal parasites for inflammatory bowel disease to being protective from infections. IBD is not infective. It's an autoimmune condition. The body's immune system is attacking itself. The parasites have an immunosuppressive effect that prevents the immune system from attacking itself. But then he goes on to say that since these parasites secrete immunosuppressive chemicals to protect themselves from the body's immune system, they may also protect other microorganisms from the immune system. So they could potentially lead to an increased risk of infection, not a decreased risk of infection. So he's wanted to make sure we distinguish between an immunosuppressive effect and protection from infection. So I just want to clear that in case you're planning to use worms as some kind of medicine in the near future. Dr. Pseudonym has also written a bit more about worms. Dr. Pseudonym is into worms. They write about the parasite manipulation hypothesis. They say, the theory goes that parasites may be able to change host behavior. For example, toxoplasmosis gondii is an infection in rats. It's seen to cause an increase in risk-taking behavior, aggression and reduced awareness of danger, which therefore increases the likelihood of the infected rat being caught and consumed by a cat, which is the actual host of the parasite. So the parasite basically sabotages the rat, so it gets to the cat. If humans are similarly affected by T. gondii or other parasites, it follows that social and political movements may in part be influenced by the presence of parasitic infection in influential individuals or groups of individuals. Mind you, the same could be said regarding environmental pollutants such as lead, she says. I think Dr. Pseudonym might be suggesting that Marjorie Taylor Greene has worms. I think that's the takeaway. I don't know about her. Maybe Matt Gaetz. I'm guessing he has literally everything. His body,
something's wrong.
Yeah, his body would be like an ark for STDs, I imagine. Matt Gaetz. But anyway, so whatever. Good thoughts from Dr. Pseudonym. And Faramara ties worms into our lab meat topic from last week as well, pointing out simply, no one's ever gotten brain worms from lab-grown meat. Good call, Faramara. I hope DeSantis is listening. Dome correspondence. I want to know what made a dome a dome. Harry says, a dome is where a circular part of the Earth's surface has been pushed upward, tilting the pre-existing layers of Earth away from the centre. So it's not just a hill, which is what I was speculating. So all you geology enthusiasts, I apologise to you. That one's for you. Comedy songs correspondence. Now, I want to end this discussion on comedy songs because it's gotten way out of hand. Our next guest, Pepper, is going to be Bill Wyman, who's a music reviewer as well. So I'm going to ask him about that. But there we're definitely ending it, because this is gone crazy. But I do want to just acknowledge all the musical comedians that I've ignored, that the Peppers are very upset that I've ignored. Mac mentioned Bill Bailey. So does Geordie. So does a lot of people. A lot of people like Bill Bailey. Geordie also mentions Lady on Woodley and The Axis of Awesome. Rip mentioned Tenacious D. And Rip personally has recommended to all of you to go to HBO Songs in YouTube. That's the name of Tenacious D's comedy special. Rip likes that a lot. Lachlan mentions Horrible Histories. That's interesting. I suppose they are comedy songs. Paul mentions Tim Minchin, and also, along with quite a few others, mentioned Tism. I imagine we've got a bit of overlap with Tism supporters on this podcast. I would consider them in the quirky category myself, rather than the specific comedy song category, but Jason disagrees, because Jason says, if you haven't heard their astoundingly funny 40-minute comedy rock opera, Two Pot Screamer, that's spelled, if you want to look it up, the numeral 2, P-O-T, all one word, then space, and then S-C-R-E-A-M-A. He says, it's worth a listen. If Jesus was a comedic musician, this would have been his Sermon on the Mount. Big call from Jason. Alex is backing me up on my point about 90s bands doing quirky. Alex says, it was totally normal for legit bands with real credibility to fully or partially embrace novelty silliness, quirkiness, etc., like Frenzal Rom, Spiderbait, Regurgitator. In that context, Birdhouse in Your Soul and lots of other TMBG songs are pretty normal. Another band I was thinking of who embraced the quirky in the 90s, Blink-182. They definitely did quirky.
Offspring, pretty fly for a white guy.
Yeah, good call.
One of the hottest 100.
Good call. And I'll tell you, actually, I reckon I've identified the missing link. I was thinking about this, the missing link between quirky and comedy. Like this group are right on the boundary where they're a little bit too funny or attempted funny for quirky, a little bit too normal for straight out comedy. So they're right on the missing link. Bloodhound Gang.
Yeah.
There's a lot of, like, are they comedy? Are they quirky? Like, you know what I mean? Because they're doing real songs, but they're clearly trying to be funny all the time, with all their songs. So I don't know. Anyway, that's the missing link for me. And then the main reason I'm going through these suggestions is the one act I really missed out last week, which so many people have brought to my attention, which is Bo Burnham. Yes, Bo Burnham, definitely one of my favourite comedy musical people of the last decade and a bit. I would definitely recommend you go on a hunt through YouTube. You'll spend all night going through his songs. There are a lot of them, and some of them are really, really good. Although these days he's moved increasingly into performance art and directing. So any favourites you want to mention that I've left out, Melina, or thoughts about comedy songs?
Let's shout out two friends of ours who are amazing musical comedians, which is Cameron James and Lou Wall. If you live in Australia and they are performing in your area, you should go see them. We've worked with both of them on What the FAQ last year, and they are very, very funny.
Good call.
And they do a lot of musical comedy in addition to other things.
And if you want, my advice to you is if you want to see Lou Wall, if you see a show of hers advertised anywhere, book then, because she's always bloody sold out. Lou, play bigger venues. It's really hard to get a ticket to a Lou Wall show. I'm right, aren't I?
Yeah.
So, get in fast while you can. All right, polling correspondence from Brad. Brad says, regarding the poll dissection between presidential candidates and senators, it's been spoken about as an anti-Biden result due to his waning popularity. But the other side of the equation is the Senate. With how much of a cluster F, I say that because there's lots of swear words coming up, so I'll save this one. With how much of a cluster F the Republicans have been in the House of Reps over the past year or two, would it be a reasonable conclusion to see this result, at least in part, as a reflection of anti-Republican senators' sentiment? Just a thought. Benjamin asks a similar question in a more specific way. Is the reason Biden is underperforming Dem so much in Arizona because the Republican candidate's Carrie Lake? Maybe that's why. A lot of poor candidates across the board, again, by Republicans in marginal must-win seats. Look, I would say that's definitely part of the picture for Arizona. There are some really poor results in Arizona for Carrie Lake. There was one this week. CBS poll had Gallego beating Carrie Lake by 13 points amongst likely voters in Arizona, 49-36. Dave McCormick is a pretty weak candidate in Pennsylvania, although 34% in the New York Times poll said they hadn't even heard of him or didn't know anything about him. So I'm not sure he's well known enough to get to the Carrie Lake stage of driving people away. But the other two states, Eric Hovde in Wisconsin and Sam Brown in Sam Brown in Nevada, they might both turn out to be terrible candidates, but at this stage, I'd say most people have no idea who they are. Jackie Rosen, also the Democrat in Nevada, is as close to a generic Democrat as you can get. She's done nothing since she got into the Senate. So I feel like outside Arizona and maybe Pennsylvania, those Senate results are pretty close to generic R versus D results, I would say. What do you think?
It's also just, I find it very hard to understand who is the person who votes for Trump but not Carrie Lake. Like in this instance, Trump is on the ballot as well. And like, fine, Carrie Lake is a bad candidate, but because she's so Trumpy, like in the midterms in that cycle, the analysis was all the people who were the Trumpy candidates lost, but Trump is as Trumpy as you get, and he's winning. So, I don't really know how to pass that, but it feels like there's something additional going on.
Yeah, look, that's a good call. I mean, look, I would say that, and we've said this a few times on the podcast, that Trump is always special compared to other Trumpy. Like, he's always got a lightness of touch that the other ones don't have. Like, whenever people try to do Trump, they always just seem meaner and angrier and scarier, quite frankly. Like Carrie Lake, you're hiding under the bed than Trump does. Like, they always have that less of that humorous touch. So I could see some people supporting Trump, but not Carrie Lake. But I think your point is very reasonable. Final correspondence, and this is where we get into the content. This is Keel asks, told you it wouldn't be too long today. Keel asks, I just wanted to get your opinion on a recent article from The Guardian. They talked about Alan Lichtman and the 13 keys method for predicting the outcome of the US election. What's your take on the 13 keys method? Does it have any predictive value or is it too subjective? Have you heard of the 13 keys method?
Yeah.
Okay, all right. Let me talk about it to the peppers and then you tell me if you think it's got any merit at all. Okay, Alan Lichtman, he's a political scientist. His prediction method he's had it since 1984 is when it started. 1992 it actually started. And he's arguably predicted every election since 1984. He's quite positive about Biden this year, by the way. We'll get to that, although he hasn't made his official prediction yet. Basically, he asks 13 questions or keys, as he calls them, and if an incumbent party gets 7 yeses, then they will be re-elected under his system. Now, I'm going to go through all the 13 questions. That, like the positive negative thing, like are we getting yes or no? It can get quite confusing at times. You get double negatives and stuff, but like you'll know what I mean. And each one, if it's positive for the incumbent, they get a yes. Okay. Oh, let me explain. Number 1, has the incumbent party achieved a net gain of seats in the US House of Representatives after the term's midterm elections compared to the previous midterm elections? So over that 4-year period, did they gain or lose seats in the House? 2, was there not a real primary contest? So if there was a real primary contest, that's a no. Okay? 3, are they an incumbent candidate seeking re-election? That's a pretty easy key to get. 4, is there a real third party getting consistently more than 10% of the vote? That's an interesting one this year, whether RFK is going to qualify for that or not. 5, short-term economy. Is the economy not in a recession during the campaign? Obviously, if it's in a recession, that's a no. 6, long-term economy. Does real per capita economic growth during the term equal or exceed the mean growth during the previous 2 terms? Okay, so is it growing more than the mean of the previous 2 terms, essentially? 7, major policy change. Does the incumbent enact a major policy change that has broad effects on the country's commerce, welfare, or outlook? It doesn't have to be a positive effect. A negative effect counts for this. They just had to have done something, essentially. 8, has there been no widespread social unrest? Once again, a negative, positive thing there, but you know what I mean. If there's widespread social unrest, you get a no. 9, scandal. Has there been no bipartisan recognition of a major scandal or serious impropriety? The logic being the opposition will always say there's scandal, but does your own side admit that scandal exists? 10, foreign military failure. Has there been a foreign military failure occurring that is perceived to undermine the standing of the United States? 11, has there been a major foreign military achievement? 12, is the candidate charismatic or a national hero? 13, the candidate's challenger, are they charismatic or a national hero? So they're the 13 keys. So there's a lot of subjectivity going on here. And let's go. Let's take this through for Biden just to show you how it works. Okay, so in the case of Biden, he doesn't get the midterms key. They have the 4 years ago before the last midterms under Trump, the Democrats won, and this time around they have a narrow deficit, so he doesn't get that key. He does get the incumbency key. Obviously, he will get the short-term economy key, because the economy is not in a recession. The long-term economy key, I think he just gets. I think the average growth is just more than the average growth of the previous 2 terms. It's just more than Trump, and it's a little bit more than Obama. Obama's second term, that is. He will get the major policy change key. Lots of major policies there. CHIPS Act, the Infrastructure Act, the Inflation Reduction Act, heaps. He will get the no scandal key. I'm sorry, Hunter Biden aficionados. That does not count. The Democrats are definitely not conceding any scandals. He will not get the foreign military failure key, I'm afraid, because Afghanistan, I think, very much would count as a foreign military failure. I'm talking about the withdrawal. That was a big mess. The foreign military success key, I don't know. Maybe not. I think it's up to Lichtman. Lichtman's going to decide on that one. He will not get either of the charisma keys. Certainly he doesn't have charisma. I would argue that he shouldn't get the Trump charisma key. I think that Trump is charismatic. I don't think he's a national hero, but I think he is charismatic. Having said that, Lichtman actually disagrees with me. Lichtman, if you look at his 2020 and 2016 predictions, he counted Trump as not charismatic. So I don't think he's even. I think he's giving Biden that key. So anyway, so that's how it works there, right? And when you count them all up, that leaves over it's unknown about the third party candidate, unknown about major social unrest, depending how Gaza goes, unknown about the foreign military success. That's up to Lichtman. So by my count, Biden definitely has 6 keys out of 13, right, already. By Lichtman's count, he has 7 because he's counting the charisma, and Lichtman's count is all that matters. So according to Lichtman's count, he's already home. He's won. Just call off the election. He's got 7 out of 13, and then there's 3 more to come. So he could potentially get 8 or 9, like if depending on how RFK goes or social unrest. So according to Lichtman, Biden's doing really well. So what are your thoughts? Do you think there's anything to the Lichtman system?
Well, the whole idea of the Lichtman system and 13 keys to me is just branding. That what he's doing is analysing a bunch of factors that have consistent impact on election and using that analysis to make a prediction. Lots of people do that. He obviously does it well. He does have a good track record of predicting correct. I don't know how many other people have a comparable record. I'm sure some people do. So I don't think I think that branding makes it sound like there's some special sauce when really he's just looking at the facts on the ground and making an educated guess. I think those are good things to look at. They all make sense. I don't disagree with the inclusion of any of them, but that's about all I'd take from it personally.
Yeah, look, I mean, let me break down a little bit more his track record, because I think that's the important thing here. I mean, as I said, there's a lot of subjectivity in these. Enough to make the subjective judgment of the decider the determining factor every single election, if you look at it. So that doesn't sound very objective to me, but track record. Let's say you predicted every election since 1984, which is what he says. Now, first of all, that means nothing for most of the elections because, the classic zoo animal could pick most of the elections. There's only been 4 interesting elections during that period, which is 2000, 2004, 2016, 2020. And I'm being generous when I say 2004. Really, it says 2000, 2016, 2020.
Didn't he get 2000 wrong?
We'll get to that.
Okay.
He says he got it right. In 2004, he had Bush winning 9-4. So that was a success. He was right there. In 2016, he had Trump winning 7-6. So that's a good result because he's calling it a close election that Trump just wins. So give him credit for that.
And lots of people got that one wrong, obviously.
Totally. So he gets full credit for that one. 2020, he had Biden winning 7-6. Also, hats off. Close election, Biden just winning. Good. He's spot on there. All right, so let's give him credit for that. In all the other elections, except for 2000, I note that he had Clinton winning 7-6 in 1992, when that was actually a wipeout. So I don't think that's a good result for him, even though he got the result right. The margin, I think he got wrong, even though he doesn't claim margins. But yeah, I think it's relevant. Okay, that leaves 2000. He had Gore winning in 2000, 8-5. Now, that in my book, that's already a fail because that's a clear win, 8-5, and that was obviously not the case of the election. There was like a coin toss. But how did he spin this? How does he say that he won when he didn't win? He says that he always said the keys told you the winner of the popular vote, not the electoral count. So he won that election.
But doesn't that mean he's been wrong?
Hang on. I know where you're going. No, make your point. I won't stop you.
Doesn't that mean he's been wrong more than he's been right? Because Hillary won the popular vote, but that's worthless in the American system.
That's exactly the point to make. And now I'll say, hold on. But then after the 2000 election, and to be fair, this is not hindsight. After the 2000 election, I'm talking about in 2002, 2003, he then said, from now on, we're not predicting the outcome of the popular vote. We're predicting the election because there's such an advantage in the popular vote to Democrats, they're going to win the popular vote every time. That's what he said. And that's not unreasonable. Okay, that's fine. But he changed what the keys supposedly predicted without changing their methodology at all. Not one bit. He just said, okay, well, this process I'm going through every single time now just does something completely different. That to me feels very fly-by-night and very dubious. So you can draw your own conclusions about him. I consider him to be lucky on 3 occasions and unlucky on 1. That's how I take it. And the rest of them I think are irrelevant. So I don't think he's very predictive. That's my take. And I would definitely be disregarding, if he comes up with 8-5 Biden or 9-4 Biden this year, I would be disregarding that if I was you. Not saying Biden might win, but it ain't gonna be a walk in the park, that's for sure. So anyway, that's my take on Lichtman and Melina's take on Lichtman. You have anything else to say about Lichtman?
No.
Nope? Okay. Well, why don't you tell us your thoughts? We're going to go into the trial now. Why don't you tell us your thoughts about anything to do with the trial whatsoever? Because there's a lot of talk around it, whatever. This is your first chance to weigh in. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, so obviously we've been talking about all the different trials over the course of the year, and I haven't been on this year yet. So one thing that I just wanted to say more broadly about Trump and all of his trials in general, because it's been on my mind a lot, and I haven't really heard the point out there much, that Trump and his supporters complain a lot that he's being treated unfairly by the justice system. And it always makes me think of the countless examples of how the justice system treats most people, I think, so much worse than Trump is treated. And, whataboutism generally gets a bad rap because people tend to deploy it to avoid accountability for their side. But I think it can actually be constructive as an analysis tool to sort of understand a broader context of something. So I think if we're going to have all this news coverage about the way that Trump is treated by the justice system, rather than debate, is it fair or not in a vacuum? Because I think there are some things you can have the debate about. I don't think that the justice system is above reproach, as will become evident. But rather than debate it in a vacuum, just looking at Trump and his cases, I just think it's a good opportunity to talk about the broader context of the justice system in general in the States and the way that it treats people who are not Donald Trump. Because I just think these are things that I've talked about before on the podcast, but I think they bear repeating, and in particular in contrast to Trump. So, these are just sort of, you could pull out a million different examples of things that are wrong with the justice system in the States, but just, specifically some of the things I hear a lot from Trump and his supporters, I think are worth contrasting. Just for example, Trump is pleading not guilty in all of his cases, but most people charged with a crime in the States don't go to trial. They plead guilty because the chances of them getting off, whether they deserve to or not, are minuscule without money and power behind them. In any given year in the States, 98% of criminal cases in the federal courts end with a plea bargain. So the fact that he's having trials at all is already something that most people don't get.
That's privilege, full stop.
Yeah.
A trial.
Yeah,
yes,
100%.
Yeah.
People make the argument a lot that Trump is being selectively prosecuted and that is therefore persecution. But you could look at, for example, the over-policing of minorities in the States and just some specific stats on it. A black person is 5 times more likely to be stopped without just cause than a white person in the States. I would argue that is selective policing and prosecutions. Yes. 5% of illicit drug users are African-American, yet African-Americans represent 29% of those arrested and 33% of those incarcerated for drug offenses. Black people and white people use drugs at similar rates, but the imprisonment rate of African-Americans for drug charges is almost 6 times higher than for white people. And in terms of guilt and not guilt, as of October 2016, it's a bit old, but 47% of exonerated, wrongly accused people were African-American. That's quite a bit larger than the percentage of African-Americans in the population as a whole. And African-American defendants are 22% more likely to have convictions involving police misconduct that eventually results in an exoneration. So, they talk about selective prosecutions as if the justice system is fair and balanced and neutral for everyone, but they just want to get Trump. Like, they're just going after Trump. It's like they go after certain kinds of people literally every single day for much less reason, I would argue.
Can I throw in while we're at it? We've heard endless, I'm going to play a bit of them later on. We heard endless bleating about the court being like a gulag. Trump goes home every day. Like, so many people who get their luxury trial, their privileged trial, go home to a jail cell afterwards because they can't afford bail.
That was the next point that I was...
Oh, sorry.
No. I'm glad you say it too, because I say Trump has the privilege of being on bail.
Yeah.
Getting bail is a lot harder if you don't have money, and sometimes even when you do, but you're not Donald Trump. So more than 60% of defendants are detained pre-trial because they can't afford to post bail. And it's very common for it to take years before you have your case concluded, just in jail before you've been convicted of anything. At any given time, roughly 480,000 people are in American jails awaiting their day in court. And most people don't get to haggle down their bail bill like Trump did in his New York fraud case. So, actually, I'd rather pay this much, thanks. That's not normal. And there's another direct contrast, and this is not even about money, but the other high-profile RICO case that Fani Willis is trying in Georgia against Young Thug, the rapper, and his associates. He could afford bail, but he's been in jail for 2 years. His trial is happening at the moment. It's the longest trial in Georgia history. It's been going for 6 months already and is not about to wrap up anytime soon. And he's been in jail for 2 years because the state argued he was a risk to intimidate witnesses. Do we not think Trump is maybe a risk to intimidate witnesses in his case? You make such a good point. And the Young Thug comparison is a wonderful comparison because there is no doubt that any other person, literally any other person who acted like Trump would be in jail by now. Yep.
Anyone, literally every other, all 7.5 billion people on earth who aren't called Trump would be in jail by now if they carried on the way he's been carrying on.
Yeah, I mean, the contempt of court in addition to everything else. Yeah. And I mean, he's lucky that he is on bail in that case because that prison, another person who's indicted in the same trial as Young Thug has been stabbed in prison in Fulton County. And that Fulton County jail is currently under federal and state investigation because it's overcrowded and dangerous. Nearly half of all people behind bars there have yet to be indicted. Some have been waiting for years. And at least 10 people died while in custody there in 2023 and 3 so far this year. So it's a shit place to have to wait for your trial. And Trump is lucky that he doesn't have to, like everybody else and anyone else, as you say, in his case would be. And even on a more personal level, Trump complained in the Hush Money case that he might not get the chance to go to Barron's graduation because of scheduling. There's a lawsuit. I was reading about this. There's a great story about this in the New Yorker, which I'd recommend. But there's a lawsuit happening in Michigan right now against 2 jails that have banned, and this isn't just these 2 jails, it's happened in potentially hundreds of jails around the country. But these 2 particular ones are being sued because they banned in-person family visits after signing deals with communication companies that let the jail split the profits of video calls with family members. So these jails, and they're jails, not prisons, so people who are not convicted yet, they signed a deal with a communications company to run the in-jail phones, video phones. They charge the inmates and their families for the calls. The jail gets a split of the profits. And in the course of this arrangement, and sometimes it's in the contracts, they ban in-person visits completely. And this is before COVID. This has been happening since 2012 in some of these places. So again, like there are people who haven't even done anything themselves. They're like the kids of people who maybe have a drug addiction and have committed some crimes, have to pay to have any contact with their family member and have to sue the state for the right to hug their dad in jail or mum. So I think most of the Republicans who are outraged about Trump's treatment in general, I mean, these are also the people who are the tough on crime people in general who like gleefully enact these kinds of policies all around the country that are really harsh, sometimes cruel, like, leave people incarcerated for years, sometimes before they've even been convicted of anything. Trump is getting special treatment. Yeah. He's been treated so much better than anyone else who encounters the justice system for any reason, I would argue. And some of that, like, he's a former president. I accept that is special. Yes. And I accept that there are logistical issues why you would want to avoid putting him in jail. I'm not saying throw him in jail, it would be easy. I'm not saying everything about all of his cases is good or great or anything. I'm just saying if we're going to scrutinize the way he's treated and analyze every aspect of it to say, is it fair? Is it not fair? Is this, case good or bad? Strong or weak? Should he be in jail? Should he not be in jail? We should understand it in the context of the broader system and the way that it treats people who are not Donald Trump.
Absolutely. And let's not forget something I mentioned on PEP probably about 2 months ago now, that in Florida, you have to pay for your jail time. You pay per day, like it's
sucks.
a hotel. And not only do you pay for what you were sentenced to. So if they let you off early, you pay for the time you didn't spend in jail as well, which is amazing. So, I think that's a really good pickup, Melina. Thank you so much for adding that context to the situation, because you're right, that has not been mentioned nearly enough. This actually cuts against what you just said slightly, in that this is something where people whinge a little bit. But I was thinking there is something which I've been trying to follow up on, because I read a Jonathan Turley column. He's very pro-Trump, unsurprisingly. He's like for those who don't know, he's the legal version of a Fox News liberal. They always say, Democrat Jonathan Turley, but Jonathan Turley always seems to be on Trump's side on any legal issue. Anyway, he, in one of his columns, said this, and it's unlike Jonathan Turley to lie. I think I often disagree with his judgment, but he doesn't make shit up, generally speaking. So this made my ears prick up. He wrote, "What's also concerning for many is that Merchan was not randomly selected. He was handpicked as the judge for this case. And many of us don't understand it. You've got a judge who is a donor to the president, whose daughter is a major Democratic operative. You would think that this would be an easy call. There are plenty of other judges." The thing that made my ears prick up, like I say all the time, I'm sick of people attacking Merchan's daughter. But even though he only donated $15 to Biden, it is true. There are other judges. You don't have to appoint someone who's actually donated to the opponent of the guy that you're overseeing. The thing that made his pick up is where they said he was handpicked as the judge for this case. I didn't know that. Is that true? I was looking everywhere to try and find out if that's true. I can't see. I've seen no other mention of that anywhere. So look, I'm going to do my thing where the next time I talk to a lawyer on our show, I'm going to ask them. It's a legal expert. But if any of you guys have actually seen a mention of this anywhere, please let me know in the comments, because I've been looking hard and I can't find. I assumed he would be randomly assigned, but if he wasn't randomly assigned, I do find that odd that they would pick someone who, even though it's only $15, donated to the opponent of the guy who he's overseeing. It's unnecessary to do that. I mean, I don't think he should recuse himself. I think all the recusal stuff is bullshit. I'm not saying he can't be fair. I'm just saying, if you are in a position where you are handpicking the judge, why wouldn't you handpick someone who's absolutely squeaky clean, who's got nothing at all that people can point to? Even that's better than even small things, So I just would flag that. But
why would you donate $15?
I have no idea.
He's a judge. I assume he can afford more.
They're not allowed to donate very much because it goes against their ethics. They're allowed to only to make very small donations, and that's it.
But that's where I'm like, why just not donate so you don't have to worry about it at all?
Joe Biden did not need that $15
exactly.
in 2020.
So if it's compromising, it's not even worth it to compromise yourself.
It's a great question. I don't know. But anyway, I just throw that out there. Okay, what I'd like to do is I'd like to just go through some of the last few days of the trial, just to recap a little bit. I'm not going to be thorough, but I'm just going to point out the things that interested me. First of all, I was really pleased to see they go into Redfinch. Obviously, the defence are Peppers, because we went quite hard on Redfinch, the Redfinch angle last PEP. They didn't mention Women for Cohen, though, everyone's favourite Twitter account. You should follow Women for Cohen for sure. But Eli Honig made a pretty good point about the fact that Michael Cohen explicitly admitted that he essentially filched 30, well, they say 30 grand, I say 35 grand from Trump by billing him $50,000 for Redfinch's poll rigging services when Cohen actually only paid Redfinch They say 20,000. I say 15,000 and a boxing glove for the same services. This is what Eli Honig had to say on CNN. Had to say about that situation.
The fact that he was never charged with larceny is important because stealing $60,000 through fraud, which would be larceny in New York State, is more serious of a crime than falsifying business records.
It's a very good point. the crime that Michael Cohen admitted to was a bigger crime than the one they're charging Trump with. The reason he said $60,000 was because, remember, they doubled everything for tax purposes. So he admits to stealing $30,000 and they doubled it. So he effectively stole $60,000. I will say this, though. A real heroic effort from Lawrence O'Donnell, host on MSNBC, trying to spin Cohen charging Trump $50,000 and then doubling it for something that he paid, a service that he paid someone else $15,000 to perform. Cohen on the stand said, yes, I stole from him. Lawrence O'Donnell, he came up with a different way of describing it.
It didn't really sound like stealing $30,000. It sounded a lot like Michael Cohen doing the little that he could within that calculation to rebalance the bonus he thought he deserved, and it still came out as less than the bonus he thought he deserved and the bonus he'd gotten the year before.
Yeah, just rebalancing the bonus. That's why Lawrence O'Donnell gets the big bucks. He's earned every cent.
It's still stealing. I mean, say, like, I should have got a bonus, so I'm just going to steal it back. It doesn't make it not stealing.
No, Melina, it's rebalancing a bonus. It's rebalancing a bonus, Melina. Listen to Lawrence. Okay. The main thing I want to focus on, though, is I want to focus on something which I talked about on Wednesday. I gave you a very shortened version of it on Wednesday. I want to give you the full version because this is PEP. We're going hard. on the what I think is the most important phone call, the most important exchange about a phone call in the trial, because it really undermined Michael Cohen's credibility, in my view. Okay, so let's go back to where it all started. It started last week when the prosecution was taking Michael Cohen through his evidence for why he thought Trump was responsible for the hush payments. They talked about a call on October the 24th where Cohen got Trump to give him permission to go through with the hush payments. And so therefore he knew about the hush payments and he was intricately involved all the way up to his neck. Question. Let's take a look at the call between Mr. Schiller and Mr. Cohen. Schiller is Trump's bodyguard. When you call Trump, you call the bodyguard and the bodyguard puts the phone to Trump's ear, right? Let's take a look at the call between Mr. Schiller and Mr. Cohen on October 24 at 8:02 p.m. Do you see that call? Yes, ma'am. And was it 8:02 p.m.? Yes. You called Mr. Schiller, or did he call you? I called Mr. Schiller. Do you know why you were reaching out to Mr. Schiller in the evening of October 24, 2016? Yes. Why? Because I needed to speak to Mr. Trump, and I knew that Keith Schiller was with him. Why did you need to speak with Mr. Trump at that point in this evening on October 24th? To discuss the Stormy Daniels matter and the resolution of it. And did you have an understanding about whether during that conversation you resolved that you were moving forward to fund the deal? Yes. Okay, so he's very, very clear about the purpose of this call, right? He remembers explicitly calling Trump or calling Schiller to talk to Trump to resolve the Stormy Daniels situation. Okay, that's that. Then this was a few days later when Todd Blanche was on cross-examination. He picked up that call again. First, he set up that Cohen hadn't changed his story. This is what he said. Do you recall testifying in response to conversations from the prosecutor about the phone call you had with Mr. Schiller at 8:02 p.m. on the 24th, 2 days earlier? Do you recall testifying about that? Yes, sir. You recall saying that you called Mr. Schiller on the evening because you wanted to speak to Mr. Trump, right? Correct. You wanted to speak to President Trump to discuss the Stormy Daniels matter and the resolution of it. That was your testimony, right? That was. Then you testified just a couple of days ago that you were successful. You called Mr. Schiller and you had a conversation, and in that conversation you resolved you were moving towards to fund the deal, correct? Correct. Okay. So once again, he's verifying that that's what the call was about. All right. Then he asked, then Blanche asked a seemingly irrelevant set of facts. He said, do you remember, I appreciate this goes back a while, do you remember at that time, October 22nd, 23rd, 24th, 2016, you were receiving a bunch of ongoing and continuing harassment phone calls. So somebody was calling you constantly. Do you remember that? Yes, sir. And do you remember that on the 24th at around 7 o'clock at night, the person who was harassing you forgot to block the number and you got the number? Do you remember that? No, sir. Okay, now that's a critical moment because at that moment, Michael Cohen is saying, oh shit, because he clearly has not been briefed on those phone calls because you got to realize the way this works with these witnesses, okay? These witnesses get prepared before they turn up on the stand. They get taken through all the evidence and then they get asked questions about that evidence. So they know what the evidence is as they're being prepared, right? And so if you're Michael Cohen and say you're potentially a bit dodgy, you can massage your evidence around, massage your testimony around the evidence that you know exists. But it seems that prosecution dropped the ball and they either didn't notice a whole bunch of text messages or they thought they were relevant, so they just ignored them. And they didn't tell Michael Cohen about those messages and calls. And that's bad news for Michael Cohen because it seems, making up his testimony around what he thought was there. And it wasn't what was actually there. And at the moment he goes, no, I have no idea about that particular text message you're referring to. He knows he's screwed because there is something he's not prepared for that they are now going to drop in his lap. And that's where we're at. And by the way, I'm going to put the link to the transcript in the homework, in the show notes. You can have a look for yourself. I'll tell you the relevant pages. They are 20 pages, but you'll read them in like 2 or 3 minutes. It's really fast to read. But it's worth reading the whole 20 pages to see just how screwed he is. Okay, so anyway, that's where we're at. We then go through eking out what happened in these calls and texts that Michael Cohen didn't know about. Cohen texted, I'm just going to summarize it now for the next little while. Cohen texted exactly, this number has been sent to Secret Service for your ongoing and continuous harassment to both myself as well as to the organizations named on it. Then the kid texted back, it wasn't me. My friend told me to call. I'm sorry for this. I won't do it again. And then Cohen texted, they're going to have to explain that to the Secret Service. If you're a minor, I suggest you notify your parent or guardian. And the kid texted, I didn't do it. I'm 14. Please don't do this. And then Cohen said again to have their parent or guardian contact him. Okay, then we continue on with the transcript. So that whole exchange was between around 7:10 and 7:24 p.m. Correct. Do you recall texting Keith Schiller at 7:48 p.m.? Who can I speak to regarding harassing calls to myself and office? The dope forgot to block his call on one of them. You don't recall that? It sounds right. Yes, sir. That shows a voicemail at 8:01 from Keith Schiller to you, doesn't it? And he points his pointer to something in the log. Yes, sir. And then at 8:02, he says, call me. And then it looks like you then call him at 8:02 for 1 minute and 36 seconds, right? Correct. So the call comes directly after Keith Schiller says, call me, which comes directly after a voicemail where Keith Schiller presumably was telling him to call him or was calling Michael Cohen. And that came 13 minutes after Michael Cohen had asked Keith Schiller, who can I speak to regarding harassing calls to myself and office? Okay, so then we go into the transcript. When you testified on Tuesday that you had a specific recollection that 1 minute and 36 second phone call on October 24th was not with Keith Schiller, that you called Keith Schiller and he passed the phone to President Trump, you finalized the deal with Stormy Daniels and you said, we're going to move forward. And he said yes, because you kept him informed all the time. That was your testimony, right? That's correct. That was a lie. You were actually talking to Mr. Schiller about the fact that you were getting harassing phone calls from a 14-year-old, correct? Part of it was a 14-year-old, but I don't know that Keith was with Mr. Trump at the time, and there was more than potentially just this, he says. And then Blanche goes for the kill. I didn't talk about this on Wednesday. 5 minutes ago, I asked you if you remembered harassing phone calls. You said no. And then I refreshed your recollection. It's totally fair if you don't remember, but now your testimony is that you were testifying truthfully on Tuesday to a 1 minute and 36 second phone call, and you had enough time in that 1 minute and 36 seconds to update Mr. Schiller about all the problems you were having with these harassing phone calls, and also to update President Trump on the status of the Stormy Daniels situation, because you had to keep him informed, because every time you made any decision, you ran it by the boss. That's your testimony? I always ran everything by the boss immediately. And in this case, it could have just been saying everything has been taken care of. It's going to get resolved. That's not what you testified to on Tuesday. You said you had a recollection of a phone call on October 24th at 8:02 p.m. where you called Mr. Schiller and he gave the phone to President Trump, and you told President Trump about the updates that you were moving towards with the funding, and he said, okay, go. That was a lie. You did not talk to President Trump on that night. You talked to Keith Schiller about what we just went through. You can admit it. No, sir, I can't. I'm not certain that is accurate. You were certain it was accurate on Tuesday when you were under oath and testifying. You were certain it was accurate. You had the phone call to President Trump, but now you are saying you are not certain it was accurate. Based upon the records that I was able to review, in light of everything that was going on, I believe I also spoke to Mr. President Trump and told him everything regarding the Stormy Daniels matter was being worked on and is going to be resolved. Okay. Am I alone in saying that that is extremely unconvincing from Michael Cohen to suggest that he never mentioned any of this stuff until now, but, oh yeah, that was there as well as the stuff which I was saying until now actually happened. That to me is a real concern. Now, to be fair, they did have Cohen making 2 more short calls to Trump on October 26th, 2 days later, just before the deal was done. So they could argue that was when he gave permission, maybe. They also have a photo of Trump near Keith Schiller on October 24. So Trump theoretically could have taken that call. To me, that's not much of a consolation, I reckon. Let me play what Eli Honig has to say on CNN about this.
I don't think I've ever seen a star cooperating witness get his knees chopped out quite as clearly and dramatically as what just happened with Michael Cohen. I've certainly seen very effective cross-examinations of cooperating witnesses. I've seen aspects of their story cut into and called into question, but this goes to the heart of the allegation here, that phone call on October 24th, and it looks to the jury and to Anderson Cooper and Kara Scannell and Judge George Grasso, who are all in the courthouse, that was a devastating moment.
I agree with him. How about you?
Yeah. Obviously, Michael Cohen is not a credible person in any context. It clearly is telling people at all times what they want to hear. In terms of the implications for the case, I think it just comes down to if the prosecution is leaning entirely on Michael Cohen to prove their case, then that's not good. If they have other corroborating evidence, because I think that obviously he's been caught out on details. I wouldn't assume it therefore means that everything he says is false. It's just that you can't rely on him for any one thing. And in a legal context, once he's been called into question, it's then difficult to rely on him if that's going to be the bulk of your case to substantiate a claim, just by the standard of court of law. So I don't really know, having not seen all the other evidence, whether that means that Trump is going to be acquitted or convicted. I still can't imagine the jury coming away with a positive opinion of Trump either way. Like, I think it is kind of funny that the defense's case is basically that the man that Trump hired as his lawyer for 20 years is unethical and a pathological liar. Yeah. It still doesn't speak well of Trump and the way he ran his operations. But
yeah, that's true.
But yeah, you would hope the prosecution has some more, because it's a stuff up by them. It's a stuff up as well because it should have been incredibly clear to them that he was a dubious witness, and so for them to set him up to fail like that is on them as well.
I think it's 100% on them. I think that I don't blame Michael Cohen for not remembering what happened exactly on one of his million phone calls 8 years ago. I don't blame that at all. I blame him for bluffing when he doesn't remember things, number one, and I blame him for no, that's it. I just blame him for bluffing. That's it.
Yeah, because he could have just said, I don't remember.
Yeah.
I don't remember when I had the conversation, but I definitely had the conversation.
Totally, yeah. But he was trying to put some mayo on it, and that's what I blame him for. But yeah, the people who are responsible for this is the prosecution. They dropped the ball. They set him up, and they stuffed up. So it's now I'm not asking. I definitely wasn't asking for a guilty or not guilty verdict. I'm not going to give that myself because I got no idea how. Number one, the trial's not over, but number two, even without that, I've got no idea how anyone will interpret anything because we're not in the court. We're reading transcripts. I just don't know, and I don't know the instructions the judge is going to give. I don't know the exact angles. This is such a weird case with such a weird logic. I don't understand. I don't even know exactly what the jury's going to be asked to decide. Like what nuance they're going to be asked to decide is going to determine the guilty or not guilty verdict. I don't know. So I'm not asking for that. What I am saying, though, is that there is definitely things that they only get from Michael Cohen. They have evidence for outside Michael Cohen that he is backed up by. Like, for instance, the fact that payments existed. The payments definitely existed. The payments were definitely dodgy. There's no doubt about that. But what they get from Cohen are things like, what was Trump's state of mind when he made the payments? Was he making the payments for campaign purposes or for personal purposes? Did he know that those payments were illegal? Did he know they were dubious? Did he have some kind of sense of what was the proper process, and was he intentionally breaking that process? Like, it's all about intent from Trump, right? Mm-hmm. You get a lot of that from Cohen. And as soon as you say, well, Cohen's full of shit, then that I think jeopardizes a bunch of aspects of this case which could potentially be critical parts of the case, depending on what the judge asked for. So I'm being very careful in couching my language here because I just don't know. But it ain't good. I know that. So anyway, correspondence from Roger on this. Re Cohen online. I have a firm view on the stupidity of not only Cohen, but Ben MASTERLIST broadcasting to their over 2 million subscribers on the eve of this trial, in which Cohen is the critical witness in the room. He's talking about Cohen's podcast, which is on the Midas Touch network, right? They have boasted about the signal boost that their online network has been getting, and the merch store in particular. Given your analysis, which accurately boils down to that, which is Cohen's most important evidence that Trump had campaign outcomes in mind, how easily do you, as defense, add the inherent unreliability argument, read that evidence on the appeal? Practically writes itself and comes with images. Perhaps the only saving grace is that they seem not to have cross-examined Cohen as to the earnings he derives from that podcast, merch, and clicks, thereby giving that one jury member they need to stop trusting Cohen on everything he says just enough doubt to acquit. I wouldn't put it exactly like Roger said, but I think it's true that I cannot believe that if Cohen gives us stuff about this case, and not just himself, which is a big if, that he would be so stupid as to spend the last year making this podcast where he's sounding off on the things that he's going to have to testify on. Obviously when you're doing a podcast, you're trying to be entertaining, you know? So he's not going to be boring. He's not going to be measured. He's going to put mayo on it, you know? And he has. They've been using quotes from his podcast in the trial to undermine him. Like this one, tell me, does this sound like a reliable and sober witness to you?
I truly hope that this man ends up in prison. It won't bring back the year that I lost or the damage done to my family, but revenge is a dish best served cold. And you better believe I want this man to go down and rot inside for what he did to me and my family.
Are you trusting that guy? Are you trusting his testimony? I just can't believe that. The Midas Touch, they're in it for themselves. That's fine. I don't expect them to care about court cases, but even though theoretically they want Trump to go down. But Michael Cohen, if he does want revenge, if he does want that revenge dish to be served cold, he should serve it a little bit colder and not heat it up with his bloody podcast. It's just, and there's another one as well. Cohen testified they'd never met Alvin Bragg before in this trial, right? Because the defense are trying to set up that there's all rigged and it's all set up, and he said, "No, I'd never even met Alvin Bragg before," and then they just whipped out his podcast.
So I want to thank the Manhattan District Attorney's Office and their fearless leader, Alvin Bragg, with whom I spent countless hours laying out how Trump directed those hush money payments and countless other financial crimes. He is about to get a taste of what I went through, and I promise you, it's not fun. Picturing Donald Trump being led through the booking process, getting fingerprinted, having his mugshot taken, fills me with delight and sadness all at the same time. Sadness, I say, because what an embarrassment it is to the office of the presidency to have a former president of the United States handcuffed and mugshotted before the entire world.
Do you want this guy to be your star witness? I'm with you, Roger. This was not a good move from especially Cohen. But yeah, from the Midas Touch as well. You have any thoughts on any of that?
The only thing I'll add just on the topic of people profiteering off of Trump's legal cases, I only just learnt this the other day that Trump is selling pieces of his suit that he wore in his Georgia mugshot.
Oh, of course he is. Of course he is.
So it's a real sleazy universe.
It is. It is.
No one's covering themselves in glory, but they're all making a lot of money.
It is a real sleazy universe, the way Michael Cohen does his podcast.
He's hard to listen to.
Anyway, look, I want to get into other stuff. So I actually skipped. We did a whole bit, me and Dave, last podcast on the Red Tie Brigade, who are sort of out supporting Trump. But I ended up cutting it not because it was great quality, trust me, but just we just ran out. We hit through the 3 hour mark, so I had to cut something out. And I was going to just push it to here, but I'm looking at time. Let's go past this. If we end up short of material at the end, then
Sure.
we can come back to that. But otherwise, I might push that either to Bill or just you guys know the Red Tie Brigade. You don't need to talk about that. Melina, I want to get into your content now. Why don't you tell us about the Texas pardons?
Apologies in advance if I end up swearing. People who don't like swearing, but this is...
I'm pretty angry about this one.
Yeah, it's pretty bad.
Yeah.
So basically, Texas Governor Greg Abbott has pardoned Daniel Perry after he was convicted for murdering a Black Lives Matter protester in 2020.
Yeah.
So to set the scene a little bit, back at the height of the Black Lives Matter protests in 2020, this guy, Daniel Perry, was doing a lot of social media posts at that time and sending direct messages to friends saying things like, and these are quotes, "I might have to kill a few people on my way to work. They are rioting outside my apartment complex, and I might go to Dallas to shoot looters." He also said a person could shoot protesters and get away with it under Texas's stand your ground laws. He also messaged a childhood friend twice in 1 month before the shooting, referring to 2 separate incidents where someone had shot at protesters at other locations, asking if they were in the right legally. And in the weeks before, he also conducted internet searches on the phrases "protest tonight," "protesters in Seattle get shot," "riot shootouts," and "protests in Dallas live." And it was after that search that he texted to his friend, "I might go to Dallas to shoot looters."
Can I throw in one more quote? Mm-hmm. Just because you got some good quotes there, but you've left out my favourite one. So I just want to make sure we don't lose that one. This is what Perry said of black protesters. "I wonder if they'll let me cut the ears off of people who've decided to commit suicide by me." Craig, I'm doing a podcast. I'll talk to you later. That's a guest appearance from Craig Rucastle from the Chaser.
Hi, Craig. Yes, and despite being warned by at least one friend to avoid confrontations with protesters, on one night when there was a rally taking place, he drove to an area where there was a protest blocking the road. He ran a red light in his vehicle and drove his car into the crowd. So he didn't hit anyone in that act, but he was driving into the crowd of people. And in this context, he nearly hit a woman in a wheelchair who was the fiancée of a man named Garrett Foster. Garrett Foster was an Army veteran. He was carrying an AK-47, which was his right. Texas is an open carry state. And Foster approached Perry's vehicle, according to other witnesses, to tell him to stay in his vehicle and move on. But when he approached the vehicle, Perry shot and killed Garrett Foster. Perry has at times said that Foster pointed the gun at him. At other times, he said things vaguer like, "I believe he was going to aim it at me, and I didn't want to give him the chance to aim it at me." Witnesses also say Foster did not raise his gun and point his gun at Perry, and Foster's weapon was found at the scene with the safety on and no cartridge in the chamber, which makes it unlikely he would have been pointing his weapon.
Yeah. Why would you?
Why would you when you're not in a position to fire it?
For the record, let me just say there is only one photo that I've seen of Foster next to the car, and you can't make out what the hell it is. I'll show it to you guys. You guys can decide for yourselves. I got no idea what's going on there. So yeah, and just one other thing I'd say: when you talk about sometimes, he said I was trying to stop him lifting his gun and aiming at me. Let's just be very clear. When you say sometimes, that was the first thing he said to the police. And then he changed his story afterwards. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
And all the witnesses, I mean, obviously the witnesses are going to be not on his side, but they all say that Foster did not raise his weapon, and there was also evidence that was consistent with him not raising his weapon.
Yeah.
So given those social media messages and posts and his actions on the night, a year after Foster was shot, Perry was indicted. And last year he was convicted of murder by a jury and sentenced to 25 years in prison.
Right.
Conservative pundits, especially Tucker Carlson, who was still on Fox News at the time, took up his cause and argued for a pardon from Governor Greg Abbott. And the way it's supposed to work in Texas is they have a board of pardons and paroles that recommend people for pardons, and then the governor decides yes or no. In this instance, Abbott, from the get-go, directed the board to consider the case on an expedited basis, saying, quote, "I look forward to approving the board's pardon recommendation as soon as it hits my desk." So he's making his views known pretty quickly in the process, and that has now happened. And now that it has happened, Perry will have his record fully expunged and he'll be legally able to own guns again, which doesn't strike me as a good idea.
No. Before you go on more, can I ask you, like, because I think the Tucker Carlson thing is pretty important because it was the day after Tucker Carlson's report that Abbott asked the Board of Pardons to review. So, and I think...
And we should say that Tucker Carlson was specifically going at Abbott, saying he didn't appear on the show, saying that it was a disgrace and that he should,
Well, on that note, I would love to just play the Tucker Carlson bit. I'll just stop it and just ask you about whether things he's saying are true or not. Because I think that this I personally, I mean, you might not, I personally blame Tucker Carlson for this situation. Okay, he was not the only person going on about this, but he was the person who, the day after, Greg Abbott reacted to. So let's just play what Tucker Carlson had to say, and then we'll stop and start it a bit.
Former Army sergeant called Daniel Perry was driving for Uber in Austin, Texas. He was an Uber driver. He's in his car, and a mob of rioters surround him in the middle of the street and begin hitting his car. One member of the mob was a man called Garrett Foster. Foster is a militant with a history of waving his rifle at people.
Is that correct so far? Is that all correct?
No. I mean, there are suggestions. Once Perry had driven his car into the crowd, there were people who were hitting the car.
Yeah.
After he drove it into them, you could argue that that was their right and a standing ground, that they were in fear for their life.
Yes.
Reasonably.
Yep.
And so they're trying to deter him and the car as a group. But he was the one who engaged. This all started when he ran a red light and drove into a crowd. So he is undeniably the person who started the confrontation.
And does Foster have his history of waving his rifle around in protest?
Not that I could find. And I mean, it is ironic from the people who usually are the ones in favor. I don't love open carry laws, but these people do.
Yes.
This is the world that they wanted. People walking around with AK-47s on their shoulders. That's the law. He was not waving it around.
Okay, let's keep on going.
He approached Perry's driver's side window with an AK-47. Then he raised the rifle, and when he did that, Perry shot and killed him in self-defense.
That's true.
As we've covered.
Maybe not true.
Even Perry wasn't saying that at the beginning.
Yes, that's right. Okay.
The lead detective in the case and the Austin police concluded it was a justified shooting. If that's not a justified shooting, there's no such thing.
We may or may not be about to get to this. Is that true?
Well, the lead investigator seems to be of a different mind. We should probably talk about aspects of the case later.
We'll get to that in a second. That's fine. All right, okay, let's just keep on going.
But because Austin, Texas, the justice system is overseen by a Soros-funded DA, Perry was charged with murder for defending himself.
Is he a Soros-funded DA? I know we're going to get to this as well.
He got donation from George Soros in his campaign because... Another bad thing about America's justice system, many people are elected to their positions, but he is not Soros funded. And the most important rebuttal to the idea, and because Greg Abbott said the same thing, that this was a liberal DA bringing this charge and therefore it's bad. Regardless of who brought the charge, he was convicted by a jury of 12 of his peers in Texas. And I'm not saying that juries always get it right. They obviously don't. But the thing that is different about this to lots of other instances is the fact that they have taken this activist interest in the case well before it's even taken its course.
Yeah. Okay, let's keep going.
And tonight, we are sad to tell you, this man, a military veteran driving an Uber car, was convicted of murder. And what does that mean? It means that in the state of Texas, if you have the wrong politics, you're not allowed to defend yourself.
That's true.
Yeah.
Just
Not the way Tucker means
opposite.
it. Yeah, that's right.
Basically, I mean, we'll get into this more as well, I guess, but I mean, Foster, under the law, had the right to defend himself against someone driving his car towards him and his fiancée.
Yes.
He had the right legally to shoot and kill Perry
Yes.
in this instance. And he was punished for his restraint by being murdered.
Yes.
And his murderer gets acquitted, well, not acquitted, sorry, pardoned, because he had the right politics in the eyes of the state.
And we'll finish off.
So this is a legal atrocity. It's so obviously unjust that tonight we extended an invitation to the sitting governor of Texas, Greg Abbott, to come on this show on Monday. And we wanted to ask if he was considering a pardon for Daniel Perry. But for some reason, Governor Greg Abbott's office told us he just can't make it and that we should talk to the Attorney General of Texas, Ken Paxton, instead. So that is Greg Abbott's position. There is no right of self-defense in Texas. We're going to keep trying to reach the governor of Texas, get his views on that, and the Attorney General for that matter.
And the very next day after that report, Greg Abbott backed down snivelingly and sought solace from the pardons board, and that is the reason I am blaming Tucker Carlson for this.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, in this case, I mean, Fox took up his cause and they didn't just argue technical self-defense. They valorized Perry and demonized Foster, who is also a veteran, I will add. Tucker Carlson made a big deal about Perry being a veteran, but Foster was as well. And his only crime, inverted commas for people listening, was attending a Black Lives Matter protest. He wasn't doing anything wrong. He was protesting. He was carrying a gun in an open carry state. Someone comes acting in a way that is clearly threatening. He tries to defend himself in a restrained way. People on Fox like to talk about responsible gun owners. He was being a responsible gun owner.
He was a good guy with a gun.
Yeah.
The safety was on. The round was empty.
Trying to use the gun, like using the gun as deterrence without actually firing it.
Yeah.
And Perry's just gone and shot him after this well-documented interest in the idea of shooting a protester. And he's the hero?
Yeah.
It's insane. And just to add to that, in case people are not already convinced that Perry is maybe not an awesome guy.
Yes.
There was additional information that got unsealed. It was not seen by the jury.
Yes.
But Greg Abbott knows this, and Fox knows it now. Perry, so basically his phone was seized as part of the investigation. They found all the stuff on it, including those messages that we said before, but also he explicitly declared himself a racist.
Yeah.
He compared the Black Lives Matter movement to monkeys multiple times. He said, too bad we can't get paid for hunting Muslims in Europe. Soon after murdering Foster, he went and searched degrees of murder charges online, which I would say says something about his frame of mind at the time. And he also searched online for good chats to meet young girls on Kik, which I hadn't heard of because I'm not gross, but is an app that's infamously known apparently for hosting grooming. And he talked sexually with a 16-year-old girl on the app.
For the record, I haven't heard of Kik either. Yeah. Yes, 16-year-old girl he was talking to, yes?
Yeah. In a sexual manner. This is a person that Fox News wants to champion the cause of.
Hang on. You're not going to get out of this without reading the quotes with the girl, surely. Okay, this is the girl. So I'm 16. I'll be 17 in 3 months. You sure you want me? She wrote. He replied, what state? Also, promise me no nudes until you're old enough to be of age. See, he's responsible. And then he wrote later in the same chat, I'm going to bed. Come up with a reason why I should be your boyfriend before I wake up. Good guy. One other one, which maybe you're going to get to this, maybe you're not. It's probably my favourite one. This is before Black Lives Matter. This is April 2020. He apparently posted a meme which included a photo of a woman holding her child's head underwater in the bath. And the text written underneath of that was, when your daughter's first crush is a little Negro boy. So anyway, not a nice guy.
No.
No, yeah. Go on.
And Foster, in contrast, couldn't have acted better. He was doing everything the right way. If someone was acting dangerously, he's trying to help. He's trying to do it in a restrained way. And he's the one that gets punished. And you think the law is supposed to be about like, yes, punishment, but it's also supposed to shape and enforce acceptable values in society, right? It's about sending a message about what is okay and what's not. And what is the message that Abbott is sending here? That everyone should shoot first and ask questions later, or certain kinds of people get to and other people don't? Like, it does remind me a lot of the Trayvon Martin case, where you have people who go out of their way, despite being explicitly warned by people not to create a confrontation with someone who is not acting in any way inappropriately. And then whether they had the intent to do something or not in the first place, they get in a confrontation, they pull the gun, they shoot someone dead who had no reason to die, and they get off because they claim self-defense. And so you should not be allowed to provoke a confrontation violently and then say, I was scared, I get to shoot them. Like, that shouldn't be how it works, but it clearly is if you are the kind of person who gets the benefit of the doubt. Shoe on the other foot, there's no way those people would be getting the benefit of the doubt.
No, not in Texas.
Black person shoots a white guy doing neighborhood patrol, he's going to jail. Black Lives Matter protester shoots a conservative, he's going to jail.
Yeah. I should just say, just to present, I mean, I'm going to ask you a little bit about the other side in a second, but just before we move off the actual facts of the case, according to Perry, in his side of the story in court is that he didn't run the red intentionally. He was texting on his phone, he said, and he
Also illegal, but
yeah, for sure. But he said he unintentionally ran the red, and there is no evidence of him using his phone whatsoever. Like now, that doesn't mean he wasn't, because if you don't actually press send on the text, you could be texting and you don't finish the text. But there is no evidence to back him up. But according to him, he was just accidentally running the red, and that's the reason he was there. Yeah, you can decide if you believe that. But
yeah. Given his many instances of demonstrating intent to have violent confrontations with protesters, I would say his state of mind is about as established as it could be.
And for the record, the jury had the chance to decide.
Yeah.
They heard that, and they made their decision.
Yeah.
And their decision was guilty.
Yes, and there's no exculpatory evidence that's come to light since then.
Yeah, this is what I want to ask about. The so-called, because Abbott keeps on saying, there's all this exculpatory evidence. Abbott keeps on saying. What's he referring to when he says that?
So the lead detective on the case, to be honest, there isn't a lot of reporting on it, so I haven't been able to find out exactly why, but basically complained that the prosecutors, they had a series of slides, 150 slides that were presented in the trial, and they wanted to remove certain things that were potentially exculpatory, allegedly. But this came before this was all before the trial. It went before the judge. The judge did not have an issue with the way things have been done. Prosecutors are allowed to kind of present things how they want, as long as the defense has access to all the materials. And as far as I can find, there isn't any suggestion that Perry was denied all the evidence he could have had to make his defense. So I can't find anything that suggests that that's real in terms of a real concern that Perry didn't get a fair trial.
I'll just say two things on this exculpatory evidence thing. If you genuinely do have real evidence that really on the face of it is going to make a huge difference to the verdict, then you and it's denied and it's denied to you in your trial, you can appeal. That is grounds for an appeal. And you don't need to have a pardon. You can get an appeals court to let you off if that is actually the case. And I'm not aware of him even seeking an appeal. So that's the first thing. The second thing is, in the world of real politic, where we're not interested in the what goes on in the courts, or we're interested in just hard-nosed, brass tacks kind of, fist in mouth kind of politics. If you've got that evidence, you leak it. That's what you do. If you got Tucker Carlson in your pocket, you leak it. That is what happens all the time in these trials. Okay, when there's something that they deny for whatever reason, you leak it to the press. This is what is happening in Trump's trial right now. They're not allowed to talk about Merchant's daughter. How much have you heard about Merchant's daughter? You leak it, and then your allies go to town on it. And they try and pervert the course of justice through the media. That is how it works. I, like you, looked for this exculpatory evidence quite hard. And I found it very hard to see anything other than him saying, 100 of my slides I weren't allowed to use. What did the slides say? Like people say, like this guy, this investigator was saying, I had great evidence that one of the charges he was found guilty of shouldn't stick. What was your evidence? No one's saying. It never gets leaked. And that to me is very strong circumstantial evidence that they're full of shit. The fact that they refuse to leak any details of this so-called smoking gun evidence, exculpatory evidence. Anyway, go on.
Yeah, I just feel like in general as well, this is a sad sign that the degradation of US politics is far from bottoming out. Because, I mean, like, in the Charlottesville rally, Trump saying there were very good people on both sides gets rightly pointed to a lot as a lowlight of his presidency. But even he didn't stoop so low as to pardon the guy who drove a car into the crowd and kill Heather Heyer. Like,
That's true. That is true.
That's where we're at. Like, think about how bad we all felt when that happened, when he said there were good people at the Nazi rally.
Yeah.
He's not letting the guy out of jail who killed a protester on purpose. And so it's a bit depressing, but things are still getting worse in US politics. And just as a little side note, because again, like I made this point before, but what stands out here is the urgency to intervene compared to other cases and the indifference you usually get from politicians and parole boards anytime non-political cases come before them. A person that the Texas Board of Pardons and Parole wouldn't grant parole to is George Floyd, famously, whose death kicked off the Black Lives Matter protests in 2020. There was an application for a posthumous pardon for him in 2022. He lived in Texas before he had moved to Minnesota. And he'd been arrested in Houston in 2004 for selling $10 worth of crack in a police sting and was sentenced to 10 months jail for that, which already seems really excessive. The arresting officer in that sting is now facing charges for felony murder after allegedly lying to obtain a warrant for a raid that resulted in 2 people being killed, and about 150 drug cases from this cop have been dismissed and 5 convictions overturned because they were based mostly on his testimony, and there are suggestions he's planted evidence. And George Floyd was arrested in a sting operation, so there's obviously questions about that. And like obviously he's died, it's posthumous, so it's not about getting him out of jail, but it would have been some nice symbolism and it wouldn't have taken them a lot of time or effort to do it. And they were not interested in that in the same way they were interested in giving Perry a full pardon, letting him back on the streets and giving him back his guns.
Yeah.
So I find that very disheartening.
Yeah, no, this story's actually made me quite angry. Like I do pride myself on being quite calm with a lot of American. In fact, someone in one of the correspondents was complimented this podcast for being an oasis of calm in a maelstrom. But yeah, this story does make me want to not be calm. I have to say.
Yeah, I just find it beyond unjustifiable as an action from Greg Abbott. I shouldn't find it hard to believe with everything that's happened, but I still find it hard to believe that people could do that and feel justified in that action.
I know it's not relevant, but not relevant to the legal side as opposed to the human side. For me, the human side's never relevant. but no, I just want to go to the human side for a second here. And that is, we just brushed past the wheelchair lady, right? His fiancée. She's a quadruple amputee who's just lost her fiancé for no reason whatsoever. And that fellow is not going to jail.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and Foster's mum has also been in the media and made the good point, I think, that it's a really dangerous ruling in the state of Texas if you're going to apply it evenly, because what you're basically saying is in an open carry state, if you're scared at the sight of someone carrying a gun, you can shoot them.
Shoot first.
In the state of Texas, everyone's allowed to carry a gun in public. So
that's the moral shoot first.
Everyone go around and say, well, there's someone with a gun, I better shoot him, in case.
Just be conservative, though, when you do. Yeah.
Again, I mean, that's not how this law is obviously going to be enforced, but if it actually were enforced equally, it would be incredibly dangerous for everybody. I mean, really, and I felt the same way after the Trayvon Martin ruling, it's just... what it comes down to is that most people don't want to kill someone.
Yeah.
Because if you do it the right way, it's pretty easy to get away with it. I shouldn't say easier, but it's certainly possible to get away with it.
Yeah, like I'm sure Perry hasn't enjoyed the last 2 years, but still, he shouldn't be enjoying the next 25.
No.
The only thing you did a great job there. The only thing I would add on to all that is just that also the Pardons Board just completely violated their own procedures as well, because they're not supposed to. The way it's meant to work is the Texas Board of Pardons say that their website says conditional pardons are considered only after minimum statutory parole eligibility has been attained. He wasn't even close to that. That was decades away.
12 and a half years.
Yeah, there you go. But pardons for innocence, which is the one he just got, require, quote, either evidence of actual innocence from at least 2 trial officials or the findings of fact and conclusions of law from the district judge indicating actual innocence. Had neither of them. So they're not even supposed to legally even consider this. So there's that. And let's just remember the history of the Pardons Board. The reason it exists in the first place, because you might think it's a bit unusual to have a state where the governor can't pardon someone until the Pardons Board tells them they can. The reason for that is because Texas has such a history of corruption that in the past, like we're talking back in like the 20s and 30s, there were 2 governors in a row who just literally pardoned hundreds of people who were all their political allies, like just one after another. It was just this assembly line, and it became such a scandal that they were forced to implement the Pardons Board as a result of that. And so the only reason the Pardons Board exists is to stop exactly the shit that just went down. Oh, and do we mention, I'm not sure we did, maybe I didn't hear you say this, did we mention that every person on the Pardons Board was appointed by Abbott? That's the other thing, right? They're all his lackeys, okay? They're not in. If you're going to have a check system where one side checks the other, the side that checks the governor can't be appointed by the governor. They should be appointed at least by the legislature, if not by some other group entirely. Like it's just a rotten system, and this really exposed the rot. Termites everywhere. Okay. Anything else on this?
No.
No, I think we've probably leached everything there is to say out of this one, other than primal screams. Okay.
Stats Nugget.
Just to cleanse our palate. This is a Supreme Court one. Just after the Civil War, the Supreme Court heard about 300 cases per year. Okay? And that's not a surprise because they had no appeals courts back then. So it was just the Supreme Court. If you wanted to appeal, you went to the Supreme Court. Right? So the Supreme Court had to hear every appeal. But then in 1891, Congress created mid-level appeals courts that would hear most federal appeals. They're like we're talking the circuit courts now. And they gave the Supreme Court discretion to turn away at least some cases. And so the number of cases went down. By the 1970s, the Supreme Court took about 180 cases per year. So it's about a little more than half of what they took before. In 1988, it kept on going down. The Congress passed another law for them to be even more selective with what cases they took. And by the 2010s, the court was taking between 80 to 90 cases per year. Still going down. And it's still going down even now. This term, the court is scheduled to hand down 61 decisions. I'll show you a graph of it right there. You can see it going down from the 1890s all the way down to 61 cases this year. And it's still going down further. But while the Supreme Court is taking fewer cases, they are more political and contentious. For example, the Supreme Court heard only 7 religious liberty cases during the 8 years of the Obama presidency in total. And they decided 7 religious liberty cases in Barrett's first year. So this is just another indication, one you don't hear often, of the way the court is becoming increasingly partisan, that they're just not bothering to do anything but partisan shit anymore. Like they're just like all the regular technical kind of cases, they're just not bothering with anymore. They're doing fewer and fewer cases, but just making sure the ones they take are more and more political. So which is an interesting diagnosis of a problem with the Supreme Court that you don't hear often. So there are the stats. Any thoughts?
That's interesting.
That's all I'm going for. Okay, I got a few more state type outrages, but they're going to be a lot shorter than the pardon one because the pardon one really needed the run up, I feel. First of all, I want to talk about North Carolina. The North Carolina Senate Judiciary Committee just approved an amendment. This is a little warning sign for the future. I'm just put the little note, and we'll come back to this maybe in a couple of years. The North Carolina Senate Judiciary Committee approved an amendment to a law. This amendment is to House Bill 237. It's been around since the 1950s. It bans the wearing of masks in public. It was brought in the 1950s because of the KKK. So they'll try and stop people committing crimes with masks, right? Fair enough. There are obviously some exceptions when you need to wear a mask in public. One of those exceptions is a health exemption, of course. They created that exception, surprisingly, only during COVID. It didn't exist until then. So the exception in COVID was wearing a mask in public for the physical health or safety of the wearer or others. North Carolina is trying to remove that exception now. So be clear, you will not be allowed to wear a mask in public for health reasons anymore in North Carolina. I'm saying it like it's going to happen because even though the governor is going to veto it, the North Carolina legislature has a veto-proof majority. So it's going to happen. One of the state house reps is a Democrat, Sydney Batch. She's immunocompromised after surviving cancer. So it's personal to her. She's supposed to wear a mask for her own health. And she said, quote, "My issue is that we're removing the specific section that gave people who are immunocompromised or people who are sick and just care about the community. Someone walking around with tuberculosis wants to wear a mask to protect everybody else. They're no longer able to do that based on this bill." They rejected her attempt to keep the health exemption. So it's happening. Getting rid of the health exemption. The bill is, as I said, about to be vetoed by Roy Cooper, and then it will go back to state legislature and they will overturn it. They'll overturn the veto. And if that happens, this will be the first of, I suspect, a whole bunch of anti-masking laws all across red state America because those states, they tend to move in sync. So you heard it here first. Get ready for masks to be banned going forward. And I can't see how that could possibly go wrong down the track. What could possibly go wrong with that law? So anyway, so that's a law. Do you have any thoughts about that one?
I just want to add that Republicans in North Carolina have argued that someone wearing a mask for health concerns would be unlikely to be prosecuted, and that police and prosecutors would use their discretion because the logic is supposed to be to stop people from using a mask disguising themselves when they're committing a crime. Fine, I understand that. Make it more illegal to commit a crime with a mask on. Like you could add an extra charge to that if you really want. I mean, I wouldn't, but if you really want to, fine. But they're saying, the obvious effect of this would be it's illegal for anybody to wear a mask, even for health reasons. They're saying that won't happen. Police aren't going to arrest the immunocompromised lady for wearing a mask. They're not stupid. It's like, well, let's just wait. And my prediction is that at some point, someone will be arrested for stupid reasons because they're wearing a mask. And it's not going to be Congresswoman walking down the street with a mask, in her nice suit and stuff gets arrested. But it's going to be some poor person who's loitering or something where cops oh, you know what? I've got a good law for this. Chuck him in the van. It's going to be that kind of thing. And it's going to happen and it's going to be shit.
I'll tell you where it's going to be. My prediction right now, it's going to be the protest. That's where it's going to be.
Yeah.
And that's how we've talked a bit about this on PEP about the protesters with masks who like I've said many times, they give me the shits a bit, but I understand why. Because if they don't wear a mask, they're going to get doxxed. And they're going to get swatted. They're going to end up having the police called to their apartment and at 3 a.m. in the morning, or they'll get pizzas or whatever, because we can't have nice things anymore.
And you were saying it's weird that they only put in the health exemption in 2020, but it kind of makes sense because it hasn't become a habitual response to, things. I mean, obviously there have been pandemics before, but not in this modern context where we all can buy, masks at the pharmacy. And it wasn't political before now. Yeah, so
you're right.
You could rely in the past on common sense that you wouldn't arrest someone for wearing a surgical mask just going about their business, but you can't rely on that anymore.
Yeah, it's like in fact, given what we're just about to talk about, this is a segue, it's like old abortion laws. Old abortion laws weren't about stopping, like restricting the women's options. They were about stopping doctors being fly-by-night operators, like because it wasn't a political issue 150 years ago.
Yeah.
And so the laws were trying to do something else entirely. Talking about which, laws that could have been around 150 years ago, Louisiana. Let's head down to Louisiana for abortion laws. Now, Louisiana's had some very interesting laws recently. Their abortion law has 2 exemptions for the life of the mother and for medically futile pregnancies. They're both very narrow exemptions and they're very poorly defined. And that, as we've said many times on PEP, the vagueness is the killer. Like if you're very specific with exemptions, then people can potentially work with them. But when you're vague, then doctors err on the side of safety, which means the exemptions may as well not exist.
Or on the side of safety for the doctors.
Yes. Sorry, yes. That should be clear.
Not the women.
That's a very good point, Melina. Very good point. The women are not safer, but the doctors are safer from lawsuit, which is what they're concerned about. And, now, in February, a Democrat, Delisha Boyd, proposed an exemption to the Louisiana abortion law for rape and incest. You would think that would not be controversial, but apparently it was. Now, she didn't have the numbers. No chance. She was going to get a rape and incest exemption. So she tried to narrow her bill. She was trying to get something done rather than to have a message bill. She tried to narrow her bill to only allow rape and incest victims to have abortions if they're 16 or younger. So it's a child rape exemption, right? And the reason she did that, apparently, she was born from her mum being raped at 15. So she knew a little bit about it, right? Now, an obstetrician from Baton Rouge testified urging the members of the Louisiana House Committee on Criminal Justice to approve Boyd's bill. She said that she and her colleagues had delivered babies for pregnant teenagers, including mothers as young as 13. She said one of these teenagers delivered a baby while clutching a teddy bear. That's an image that once you see it, you cannot unsee it. That bill went down on partisan lines 7-4. One legislator who voted against creating the exemption, Lauren Ventrella, said she believed teenagers who had consensual sex might feign rape or incest in order to get access to abortion service. And just while we're out here talking about this kind of stuff, a 2023 survey in Louisiana found 77% of Louisiana voters supported an abortion exemption for rape and incest. Not child rape and incest, rape and incest, full stop. So anyway, so that's the first interesting Louisiana abortion law. Do you have any thoughts on that one?
I mean, just the logic of we need to not let children who have been raped have an abortion if they become pregnant, just in case a child had consensual sex and got pregnant that way, in which case we must force them to have a child. Like, that's truly awful.
Yeah.
It's pretty bad.
It's not a great mindset.
No,
it's not. But that was February, as I said. There's a more recent law which is attracting the attention of the press at the moment. This is Senate Bill 276. It's a bid to classify mifepristone and misoprostol as Schedule 4 drugs. So treating them like opioids, essentially. So those are, for those who haven't listened to PEP ever, many times, those are the drugs you take to have an abortion via pill, essentially. You take them in combination, the two of them.
And Schedule 4 drugs are drugs that are like addictive and harmful.
Yes. No, they are.
That's why they're controlled, because you don't want people to have drug addictions.
Yes, they are considered to be dangerous substances. Whereas mifepristone and misoprostol are both, in many places, don't even require prescription. So because they've got no evidence of being dangerous. So
and they're obviously not addictive.
No, one would hope not. And if this bill passes, this is an if, this hasn't passed yet. If this bill passes, Louisiana will be the first state in the country to classify mifepristone and misoprostol as controlled dangerous substances. Now, under the bill, we should be clear about this bill is not just flat out banning them. If you possess mifepristone and misoprostol without a valid prescription, you face up to 5 years in prison and $5,000 in fines. But it's possession that they have outlawed. Pregnant women are allowed to take it. Like there is an exemption for pregnant women to use those pills for their own consumption. But if they're aborting their baby when they take them, they're breaking the Louisiana abortion law, right? So they've already, this is the thing, it's an unnecessary law because they're already covering abortion, pill abortions because they've banned abortions, whether it's with a pill or not, right? So you're not allowed to abort your baby through the use of those pills. But if you're a pregnant woman taking it, you're not violating this law. You're just violating the other law, right? So what this law is really about is about people helping women get mifepristone and misoprostol. Doctors, in other words. If you're possessing it without having the right to possess it for whatever reason, then you and your intent to supply it, they'll get you with this law. That's the idea, right? It obviously makes acquiring the drugs for future use much harder for women, which is what they're trying to do.
Because that's becoming, at least anecdotally, a thing that women in states with very restrictive laws are buying these drugs when they're not pregnant, just in case they need it later on.
Exactly. And so...
also, it's just worth mentioning these drugs are not just used for abortion as well, which is another reason why it's problematic to restrict their availability. They're used for managing miscarriages. Yep. They can be used for things like if you're having a procedure involving the uterus, like inserting an IUD, people often get prescribed it beforehand, or getting a biopsy of uterine lining because it softens the cervix. So it helps with those procedures. And it can also be used to induce labor. So there are other reasons why people use these drugs.
And ulcers.
Yeah.
It can be used for stomach ulcers. So that's a good reason to keep
methotrexate is another one which can be used for ectopic pregnancies, which can be fatal, but it's also used for rheumatoid arthritis. I know someone who's on that drug.
There you go.
It's quite common for immunocompromised, or it's an immunosuppressant drug.
So they are effectively outlawing those usages unless you happen to be pregnant. You can't get your stomach ulcer treated.
Well, I suppose if you have a prescription, you can, but it just potentially restricts the access, and it makes pharmacists less likely to carry the drugs or.
It's the grey areas.
It's the chilling effect thing. Yeah. And it's not a hypothetical concern, because back in 2022, when Roe v. Wade was first overturned, the Department of Health and Human Services sent out a guidance to pharmacies around the country saying, because there had been reports about these drugs being restricted, and pharmacists, a doctor sending a prescription to a pharmacy for use, and pharmacists calling them up and saying, is this for an abortion? And, potentially restricting it or not carrying it. So this has already happened. It's not a, scary thing might happen in the future situation. This is a thing that's happened that's already a real concern.
Yeah. And I've got one more thought, and then I'll throw to you if you have any other thoughts as well. And that is that I think we've explained why this isn't necessarily the best law, and also a complete unnecessary law. But on top of that, this is part of a broader range of problems with Louisiana, which is if you're in a state where they're constantly finding creative ways to crack down on doctors and to scare doctors, essentially, and to scare medical professionals, there's one more way that it punishes the women. It's not about abortions. It's not about mifepristone. It's about the fact they don't have any obstetricians or gynecologists because they flee the state. Because they just go, well, what's the point of working in this state? If I've got a gun pointed to my head, that I'm constantly at a risk of jail time because I'm looking after these women, I'll just do it in another state. And Louisiana is, sure enough, right down the bottom of the people per obstetrician / gynecologist list. So that makes it harder for women to get treated for anything when they're pregnant, because it's harder to get in the point with a gynecologist because they don't exist. So, yeah.
Yeah, no, that's a documented thing that's happening in a number of states that are bringing in restrictions, which ultimately puts women in danger even for wanted pregnancies if there's less availability for medical support. And the same with restricting access to these drugs when they're used for other procedures. It just risks making things unnecessarily painful for women and increasing their medical suffering unnecessarily just for these performative laws.
Yeah, I agree. Okay, so just one more thing I'll throw in here because it's just abortion related, even though it's not good to Louisiana. We've talked a bit about Trump and the Comstock Act. That's the act which might outlaw the posting of abortion pills somewhere down the track if Trump appoints the wrong attorney general. And I have been calling over and over again for people to put him on the record with his policy on the Comstock Act. Is he going to enforce it, or is he not going to enforce this ancient act? You might recall 2 or 3 weeks ago, we played we didn't play a grab. We read a transcript from an interview from where Time Magazine asked him about that, and he said, "Oh yeah, I'll have a policy in a week or two." Like the classic Trump. "Oh, in a week or two, we'll have a great policy, a lovely policy. You'll love this policy."
Very smart.
Yeah. And at that point in time, it was already 3 weeks since he'd said that. That was 3 weeks ago now, so it's about 6 weeks since he said in a week or two we're going to have a policy on Comstock. We got one more of those kinds of examples this week, but this time there was a slightly different result, which was interesting. This was I'm going to play it to you. This is an interview Trump undertook with a Pennsylvania TV station.
Do you support any restrictions on a person's right to contraception?
Well, we're looking at that, and I'm going to have a policy on that very shortly. And I think it's something that you'll find interesting. And it's another issue that's very interesting. But you will find it, I think, very smart. I think it's a smart decision. But we'll be releasing it very soon.
Well, that suggests that you may want to support some restrictions, like the morning after pill or something.
We are also, things really do have a lot to do with the states. And some states are going to have different policies than others. But I'm coming out within a week or so with a very comprehensive policy, which I'll get to you immediately.
Okay, good.
I got no doubt that policy is coming. So anyways, classic Trump. In a week or two, we have a very smart policy. You'll love the policy. What a great policy. Clearly bluffing. I can't believe people still fall for this shit. Like, it's just so obvious. Anyway.
But the other thing that he's doing a lot, which I think is not as smart as he thinks it is just running this "it's the states" line over and over again. Like, obviously he came to that line a few weeks back of "I'm leaving it to the states" in terms of a federal ban, and he's trying to deploy that in every instance, because there was another instance very similar to that. I think it was in the Times article where they asked about the prospect of states that have restrictive laws tracking a woman's pregnancy in real time to make sure she carries its term, basically, with a view to prosecute her if something goes wrong, which is quite dystopian.
Yes, it is.
That's not, a serious accepted policy proposal. That's like one of the very out there ones of, people saying, Handmaid's Tale kind of scenario. Yeah. And he said, yes, some people might want to do that. But really, I don't have an opinion on it. It's up to the states. Yeah. That's not going to fly. No. People aren't going to be like, oh, okay, so I should be worried about that insane, horrific proposal, and you're not going to stop it, and you don't care. You're like, oh, it's not my problem. It's the state's problem. I think he thinks that that's just a way to get it off his plate, and no one's going to worry about it. Whereas to most people who are kind of just paying a vague amount of attention and maybe watching political ads as they get edited, are going to hear that and think, oh, Trump wants people to track women's pregnancies and put them in jail if anything goes wrong. I don't think that's a winning political strategy, personally. Oh, yeah, you're absolutely right. In fact, that's exactly, we're coming to the quick of it here. There's exactly what happened this time. What happened this time, the reason this was different to the Comstock Act is the Comstock Act was just in the Time magazine, just got forgotten. This time, the Dems went nuts online. They went, hey, look at this. He's not ruling out getting rid of contraception. He's saying some states might want to get rid of contraception. That is Trump's policy. And they beat him over the head on it. And within a day, we didn't have to wait for a week. Within a day, he was backing as far away from that as he possibly could. Beep, 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 full on reverse. Yeah, he put out a post. Trump says, I have never and will never, is all in caps, and will never advocate imposing restrictions on birth control or other contraceptives. This is a Democrat fabricated lie, misinformation / disinformation, because they have nothing else to run on except failure, poverty, and death. I do not support a ban on birth control, and neither will the Republican Party. So they drew out a denial from him, at the very least, which is what I think. I mean, they wanted to get political capital, obviously. But for those of us who actually care about results, that's what we wanted to hear. We wanted to hear no. The word no. Yes. But do you believe him, is my question to you. Do I believe him that he's not going to interfere with contraception?
Yes.
Probably, just because it's unlikely that he would. I mean, who knows with what he's going to do? But I mean, he's got a long track record of not actually doing the things he even wants to do, and I don't think that his heart is in restricting contraception. I don't think that is front of mind for him as a policy agenda. But I also think it's, even if it is a states thing primarily, it's still within the remit of the president to signal what he thinks is acceptable and not acceptable. And I think it does send a message to people who are sort of chomping at the bit in these sort of state legislatures that it's not beyond the pale to go there. So I don't think it's good, even if I think it's unlikely that a President Trump would bring in a contraception law to ban all contraception. I also just want to say, you specified that he was typing in all caps, and I feel like it's probably a time saver to just tell us when he's typing in correct sentence case.
That's true. That is true. He does do that a lot. That is true. Look, for the record, I do believe him that he wouldn't. I mean, I think you make a good point about distinguishing between the Trump contraception law and creating a situation where a state could go their own way. That is a distinction that needs to be made. But at least as far as the Trump contraception law, I do believe he's definitely not going to bring in any anti-contraception laws, because that's not even his policy. He didn't propose that. The guy brought it up. He tried to bluff his way out of it, like he always does whenever you surprise him with something. And then the guy just did a follow-up, and he tried to bluff his way with his old states' rights thing, and it didn't work. So then he started to backpedal. Like, I don't think he has any love for this idea at all. So I do believe he's not going to do this. Also, the polling is terrible. It's hard to find polling on contraceptives because no one would be so stupid as to try to outlaw them. Like, the last poll I saw was from Pew in 2016, where 4% of Americans saw contraception as morally wrong. And the only group that was in double digits were Catholics who attend Mass weekly. 13% said contraception is morally wrong. And that doesn't mean 13% wanted to ban it. It was just saying we're morally wrong. So I don't think it's going to be happening. But having said that, you do make the point that, like Louisiana, some place where they don't care about the popular will. It's possible that one of them might try maybe not all contraception, but might try Plan B or something.
Do you count the morning after pill as contraception or an abortion? Yeah. Different people would have different opinions on that. I don't think they're going to take condoms off the shelf of supermarkets, but birth control,
totally,
maybe morning after pill particularly.
It's possible. And to be fair, if they do that, it might have nothing to do with Trump. Like, he might not be able to stop it even if he wanted to. But having said that, I do feel. Basically, I think this is a great example of Trump being caught with his hand in the cookie jar when he tries to bluff. And it's a great example of what everyone should do with Comstock Act. Keep going with the Comstock Act. Make him deny it. Because if you don't make him, he will just do this 2 weeks thing forever. Anyway, Melina, let's talk about something a lot more savoury. In fact, the opposite. The opposite of a newborn. Rudy Giuliani. I can't believe I just said he's more savoury, but he's more savoury.
Yeah, I was going to say, are we about to talk about Giuliani?
He's more savoury than banning abortions. Than banning contraception. Let's put that one.
Sure, marginally. He is the opposite of a baby. We can say that. Yeah. He is in a lot of legal trouble right now. I think we should do a quick summary of how he's going in a legal sense.
Let's go for it.
Just a recap of current cases. In December, he filed for bankruptcy after being hit with a $148 million defamation judgment for defaming the 2 Georgia election workers. He's also being sued for defamation and false arrest by a grocery store employee in Staten Island.
I didn't know that one.
He's being sued by blueberry farmers who say he pocketed $300,000 of the $1 million they invested in an anti-Biden documentary that was never made. Do you know that one?
Blueberry farmers. Yeah. Blueberry farmers made an anti-Biden documentary. They tried to make an anti-Biden documentary.
But they tried to invest in Giuliani's anti-Biden documentary.
I didn't know this one either.
It was a documentary that was going to sink the Biden administration, for sure. Except it never happened for some reason. He's being sued by Hunter Biden for allegedly hacking and tampering with his laptop data.
I know that one.
It's your Giuliani legal case bingo card. Yes. He's being sued by a law firm he allegedly retained and didn't pay.
Yep, I know that one. Yeah.
He's being sued by Dominion and Smartmatic for his false claims about election rigging. Being sued by a former staffer for sexual assault and harassment and unpaid wages. He's a criminal defendant in the Georgia Fulton County racketeering case, and most recently charged with conspiracy, fraud, and forgery in the Arizona election case.
That's 5 I know. Bingo!
Hey! A bankruptcy judge recently said he's disturbed by the fact that Giuliani has appeared to make no effort to pay his creditors after declaring bankruptcy, including not sticking to the $43,000 a month budget that he told the bankruptcy court he would. Allegedly,
so how much was that per month?
$43,000 a month.
He didn't stick to that.
No.
Okay. All right. Yep.
He said, I need that much to live, and after that, I'll start paying people back, and he's burning through it. He's allegedly lying about the value of his assets, and he's still living in the $3.5 million Palm Beach home that he was supposed to sell to help pay off his creditors.
Right.
Amidst all of those issues, Giuliani is turning 80 at the end of May.
Congratulations.
He's throwing 2 birthday parties, one in New York next week and one was in Palm Beach, Florida last Friday.
Yep.
The party invite said gifts aren't necessary, which is always a lie.
Okay.
And because we know this, and because he's clearly having trouble living on just $43,000 a month, he did have a gift registry for people who did want to buy him something. Probably should have had $148 million to pay his creditors, but that wasn't there.
Sadly.
But like everything remotely connected to Trump world, it did leak, the gift registry.
Oh,
so
do you have some highlights?
There are some highlights.
Yes.
From the Rudy Giuliani 80th birthday Amazon gift registry.
Let me guess. Hair dye.
He asked, some similar. He asked for an electric razor, Giorgio Armani cologne, a specific 55-inch television worth $3,200, numerous rugs ranging in price from $229.90 to $516.21. He needs a few rugs. A document scanner.
He definitely. I'm surprised he doesn't have a rug, to be honest.
he has dye. A document scanner, a podcasting mic boom, and stain-blocking ceiling paint.
Stain-blocking ceiling paint?
Yeah.
He's staining the ceiling somehow?
I think I had to look it up, and it's for when you have stains in the ceiling and to paint over it rather than addressing whatever is causing the staining on your ceiling in the first. If that's not a metaphor for the MAGA universe, I don't know what is. So the ceiling's falling in. Let's just paint over it and it'll be fine.
Okay. So he already has stains on his ceiling.
It would appear so, yeah.
Okay, all right.
And you paint over the stains.
So he's already murdered the people.
Yeah.
Okay, all right, okay. Okay, sure, okay. So I hope the police are paying attention to that. Okay, all right.
The big party in Palm Beach, Florida, was hosted by a friend of Giuliani's, as well as a GP consultant called Caroline Wren, who said, quote, Rudy Giuliani is a hero, so it should be no surprise that so many of his friends, family, and supporters want to come together to celebrate his 80 years of service to this great country. 80 years of service. He was serving the country when he was 1 year old. He's that good. Before he was America's mayor, he was America's baby.
To be fair, his first few years of service are probably better than his last few years of service.
He was crawling around the daycare, like locking up kids for graffitiing on the walls with crayons.
Yes.
So, yes, I guess he deserves all those great presents. But it was an eventful party.
Mm-hmm.
He is said to have belted out a rendition of Sinatra's New York, New York to cheers from the guests. Then, as he was leaving on his way to the car, he was served with his indictment for the Arizona trial, which he was the last person to be served because he was apparently hard to track down, but less hard once he started bragging about the fact that they would not be able to find him. But here's where I'm having my birthday party.
Yeah, with photos.
With photos and videos and all my nearest and dearest friends.
Yeah. No, I believe that they end up delivering him they served him an hour and 14 minutes later after he bragged with this tweet right here about how they were never going to get him. So,
I'm glad you had that one ready.
Yeah. Yes, I did. Of course I did.
So swings and roundabouts for the world of Rudy Giuliani. But
Well, the good news for Rudy is how much does he owe? Is it?
It was $148 million.
Okay. All right. So, well, the good news for Rudy is I can't do the maths in my head too quick, but $148 million, you're looking at only selling maybe 50 or 60 million coffee pots because he's making this. I've got a little bit of video for you here of how he's making up this money. This ad is it's hot off the press, 20th of May. So you can buy your Rudy.coffee right now.
You all know I stand by the truth. And if I put my name on something, I truly believe in it. Today, I'm thrilled to introduce you to something I'm incredibly proud of. My own brand of organic specialty coffee, Rudy Coffee. Believe me when I say it's the best coffee you'll ever try. It's smooth, rich, chocolatey, and gentle on your stomach.
I just want to play the bit where he says it's chocolatey. There's nothing I trust more when thinking about things that I'm going to put in my mouth than someone who's standing in front of an apparent room that is clearly a green screen. There's nothing that makes me more confident in that person's product.
It looks like a shit Zoom background. It's so bad.
Oh, Rudy.
He's got piles of washing behind him.
Yeah, Rudy.coffee. That's all good coffee stores, folks. Yeah, that's a good one. Nice. Let's just do another quick stats nugget. Stats nugget. Woo! Okay, this is a guessing game for you. Right. Open Syllabus are a non-profit group who collect over 5.5 million syllabi from over 4,000 colleges and universities. In 2023, woke terms like critical race theory, structural racism, or transgender appear in what share of college and university syllabi, in your view? What percentage of college and university syllabi in America have the terms critical race theory, structural racism, or transgender?
1%.
0.08%.
That's pretty close.
Yes. Well, you're within 1%. But look, that might be too specific. So let's broaden that out a little bit, shall we? They're very specific terms. What share of college and university syllabi do you think have the term race appear in them? Now we're talking race. That's a very broad term. If you're talking about wokeness, race will often be involved. What percentage do you reckon?
I'm going to just say 1% again.
2.8% this time. It's not many. I'm not going to get you to guess gender because you'll say 1%. So the answer for gender is 4.7%. So there we go. But is there more of it now than there was 15 years ago? Because maybe it's trending up. I'll show you a graph. No. Not only is there the same amount of gender in syllabi, but it's actually slightly less in the case of race than 15 years ago. So there we go. But this is counting tech colleges, Melina. This is counting colleges that are never going to be doing woke stuff. You know, let's worry about the elite institutions. They're the problem, right? Harvard. What percentage of syllabi in Harvard has the word race appearing, do you think?
3%.
Bingo! 3.2%. You've obviously been to Harvard. Gender, 0.5%. So there we go. Let's go super woke. Forget Harvard. Let's go all the way to the University of California at Berkeley. That is woke central. Critical race theory appears in 0.38% of syllabi. Transgender appears in 1.1% of syllabi. So there's a bit more at University of California at Berkeley. Like I said, this is as woke as it gets, right? Less than 10% of course syllabi mention race or gender. So it's more, but still not as much as you might think should you get your syllabi information from Fox News. Finally, let's focus on, let's talk engineering courses here and stuff. Let's focus on sociology. Just sociology, okay? They're the woke courses, right? There are only 1 in 125 students who do sociology in America, okay? Less than 1% of sociology courses include the terms critical race theory, structural racism, and transgender in America. So there you go. So these are all very interesting statistics I think you'll find. That was a stats nugget. Okay. I'm looking at the time here. I want you to talk about Alito. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to just quickly go through the CFPB case to set this up. I'll do it quick, and then you can talk about Alito. All right. Now, the Consumer Finance Protection Bureau is Elizabeth Warren's brainchild from after the recession. it cracks down on financial dodgies. Okay, and financial dodgies like payday lenders, who are basically the shysters who loan you very, very high interest rate loans, small loans, for a couple of days or whatever, theoretically until your payday. The Consumer Financial Services of America are a trade association for payday lenders, and they want to take down the Consumer Finance Protection Bureau because they are limiting the interest rates that they can charge. And so they tried to get them declared illegal, the entire group illegal, the Consumer Finance Protection Bureau, based on their funding mechanism. What's their funding mechanism? The Bureau can request a budget of up to 12% of the Federal Reserve System's total operating expenses as reported in fiscal year 2009, adjusted for inflation. So they basically get their money from the Federal Reserve System, not from the government. It's not apportioned from the government, from an appropriations bill. The CFSA argues that this violates the Constitution's appropriations clause, which requires the, quote, no money shall be drawn from the Treasury but in consequence of appropriations made by law. Now, why is that bullshit? The reason that's bullshit is because of the last three words, made by law. Congress passed a law saying that the CFPB could get funding from some other method. Since it's made by law, it's constitutional. Hard to see the problem here. Especially given this is not the only body that does this kind of thing. Plenty do. In fact, back in the early days, bodies did that as well, like under the Founding Fathers. Congress, when the customs system first was established in the 18th century, they funded the customs system by paying the customs collectors a percentage of the value of the freight they reviewed and assessed. So that's right back at the beginning of America. And since then, there's been heaps of other places. In particular, most notably, the Federal Reserve is financed mostly through interest it earns on government securities like Treasury bills. Okay, if you struck down the CFPB, you strike down the Fed. That's a big deal, right? You got a problem then. But also, there's heaps of payments that aren't appropriated. Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, they're not appropriated by Congress every year. They were formed by an act decades ago, and then they just keep on rolling over. So to quote Elena Kagan, she pointed out that spending that does not require periodic appropriations accounted for nearly 2/3 of the federal budget. That's a good point, Elena. It also, I should say, the CFPB's already been upheld by Supreme Court. They've already heard this case. But back then they didn't have 6 conservatives. So the payday lenders were taking another run at it. And finally, this would be incredibly unfeasible if they did this because the CFPB controls the conditions of the mortgage market. If you just clicked your fingers and got rid of the CFPB, the mortgage market would be in chaos. Home building, home sales, the other industries that depend on the mortgage market would also be in chaos. That's 17% of the US economy. You'd have a new Great Depression. So that would be a practical problem as well. Bottom line, 7-2 against on the Supreme Court. It was a smashing. In fact, it was such a smashing, the majority opinion was written by Clarence Thomas, of all people. Okay, that's when you know you've really lost. Okay, he was of the view that the original public meaning of the Appropriations Clause needed only identify a source of public funds and authorise the expenditure of those funds for designated purposes. And he's the originalist. So that's the original right there, okay? All seems very normal, except for we now do a little dog leg to focus on one aspect. I just wanted to bring it up to show you it was a real non-decision. It's so obvious. Like, complete slam dunk. Except for one person in particular. Well, it was for Gorsuch as well. Gorsuch was one of the two, but Gorsuch has some funny rulings at times. It's very difficult to work out what's going on in Gorsuch's head sometimes. He's conservative, but he's not necessarily a reliable hack or anything like that. But he has some very interesting notions. But then there's Alito. Alito cites Georgetown law professor Josh Chavez, his 2017 book, Congress's Constitution, Legislative Authority and the Separation of Powers, to support his view. It's like a historical book. Except the thing is, the author of that book, Josh Chavez, has explicitly said that Alito doesn't understand his book at all. Quote, Alito's dissent cites my book 8 times, which is lovely and all, but the dissent is wrong, and a remotely attentive reading of that work would make it clear why. In the book, Shafet says that the text of the Constitution allows for indefinite appropriations in all contexts other than the army, which is saying that Alito is wrong. This is the real-life version of that scene from Annie Hall that I love so much. One of my favourite movies, Annie Hall, where a wanker professor cites Marshall McLuhan in a cinema line, and have you seen this? Do you know what I'm talking about? Yeah. And I'll play it to you guys.
It's the influence of television. Yeah, now, Marshall McLuhan deals with it in terms of it being a high intensity, you understand? A hot medium.
What I wouldn't give for a large sock with horse manure in it.
Which he uses essentially
what do you do when you get stuck on a movie line with a guy like this behind you?
Wait a minute, why can't I give my opinion? This is a free country?
He can give you. You have to give it so loud. I mean, aren't you ashamed to pontificate like that? And the funny part of it is, Marshall McLuhan, you don't know anything about Marshall McLuhan's work.
Really? I happen to teach a class at Columbia called TV, Media, and Culture. So I think that my insights into Mr. McLuhan, well, have a great deal of validity.
Oh, do you?
Yeah.
Well, that's funny because I happen to have Mr. McLuhan right here. So yeah, just let me come over here a second.
Oh,
Tell him.
I heard what you were saying. You know nothing of my work. You mean my whole fallacy is wrong. How you ever got to teach a course in anything is totally amazing.
Boy, if life were only like this.
So Woody Allen drew out Marshall McLuhan to say, you have no idea of my work. This is the real-life version of that. The author of the book that Alito cites says, you are an idiot. In fact, Kagan and Sotomayor and Kavanaugh and Barrett, they all examined the history of appropriations from an originalist perspective as well. And they all found that he was an idiot because they did it accurately, unlike Alito. Kagan said, a reason to uphold Congress's decision about how to fund the CFPB is the way our government has actually worked. So how did Alito deal with these precedents, like the Federal Reserve? He ignored all the other bodies that were funded, just ignored them. He focused more on precedents in medieval England instead. But there's one precedent he considered, which was he acknowledged the Federal Reserve is funded in a similar way. But he said, quote, for appropriations clause purposes, the funding of the Federal Reserve Board should be regarded as a special arrangement sanctioned by history. Why? Because it is a unique institution with a unique historical background. Huh? What? You can't... What kind of originalist is this? Fencing off historical precedents as irrelevant for no reason whatsoever. That's not an originalist. And so basically, Alito's just making shit up, right? He said, quote, it is not an exaggeration to say that CFPB enjoys a degree of financial autonomy that the Stuart King would envy. No, there's actually a definition of an exaggeration. That is a huge exaggeration. And the fact that he writes opinions like that, it's kind of a disgrace. But the main takeaway is Alito is a hack. He's much worse than Thomas. Thomas is conservative, but at least he's capable of thinking of something that isn't in the Republican Party's talking points. Literally, there have been some great stats thrown around this week on how much of a hack Alito is. This really brought out the Alito think pieces this week, this case. And my favourite one is from political scientist Lee Epstein, who says that if you look at the Supreme Court's standing decisions over the last few years, so we're talking about decisions where they decide if they have jurisdiction over a question. It's not ideological at all. It's just a technical decision, right? Thomas has voted 4 times against a conservative litigant and twice for a liberal litigant when it comes to standing. All the other judges have, various mixtures. Alito has ruled in favour of conservative litigants 100% of the time, 6-0, and against liberal litigants 100% of the time, 0-10. 100% of the time. As far as criminal defendants go, the 3 court Democrats voted with criminal defendants in over half of the cases that they heard. Justice Jackson favoured defendants in nearly 80% of the time. That's not a surprise. She's an ex-defender. Gorsuch favoured the defence 45% of the time because he's always a little bit libertarian. The other conservatives favour them less. But then there's Alito, who favoured the criminal defendants 20% of the time. There's only one group of criminal defendants that Alito's worried about. I bet you can guess who they are. The January 6th defendants. And, of course, Trump. So the man is a massive hack, which takes us to this week's controversies. Take it away, Melina.
Yes, so there was a New York Times report this week that in the period just after the January 6th riot, Alito was seen to fly, or there was a flag flying outside Alito's home, a US flag flying upside down. And there was a photo of this, so we know that it's happened and he hasn't denied it. And for people who don't know, flying the flag upside down, so the traditional meaning of that is at times in war, for example, you might fly a flag upside down as a sign of extreme distress, so SOS basically. Something's going terribly wrong, come send help. Because obviously you would not fly the flag upside down in normal times if you're the type of person who reveres it. But in recent times, that symbol that has been sort of taken as a symbolism for the country is in distress, it has been used by the left and the right at different times. So, where the country's in extreme danger because of Trump, upside down flag in some protests, for example, but it has been particularly in recent times associated with the January 6th protesters. So there were protesters in the January 6th riot flying the flag upside down. That symbolism was used by supporters of it. This is something that is not necessarily known by everyone, but it was sort of particularly becoming associated with that group at that time. And so you might find it curious that in the days after January 6th, the home of a Supreme Court justice had an upside-down American flag flying outside of it. So people have asked him about this, and he had said, "I had no involvement whatsoever in the flying of the flag. It was briefly placed by Mrs. Alito in response to a neighbor's use of objectionable and personally insulting language on yard signs." First of all, briefly is a bit of a stretch. It was up for a few days.
Right.
Certainly long enough, even if he wants to throw Mrs. Alito under the bus in the same way that Clarence Thomas threw his wife under the bus when her January 6th involvement came to light. Long enough for him to have known. And he's not denying that. He's not saying he didn't know that it was flying outside his home. What's going on with him and the neighbors? So he's expanded on this in an interview with a Fox News reporter. Basically, you might think they would live in a gated community. They don't. They live in I'm sure it's not a normal community, but it's not gated. And there were neighbors in their vicinity who were not fans of Trump, and they had signs in their yard saying, like, "fuck Trump," things of that nature. And the Alitos complained to them saying, "There's a school bus that stops, down the road. We don't like the profanity, I suppose." And they got into a heated argument, and the one person who lived in that home called Mrs. Alito the C word. And they also apparently put additional signs in their yard specifically blaming the Alitos for January 6th, but we don't know what the language of those signs were. We haven't been told that. But there's obviously like a neighborhood dispute, and I think things have become more heated on the block since the Roe v. Wade decision as well.
Sure.
There's tension on Alito block. Okay. But what he's basically saying, like, he's not denying he knows the connotations of it. Effectively, what he's saying is that they were so aggravated by this behavior of the neighbors that Mrs. Alito flew the flag upside down, by their argument, as a troll, I suppose, to their neighbors.
I don't understand the logic. Like, they're saying fuck Trump. They're saying you're a C. They're saying, and you're at fault for January 6th. So therefore you respond by flying the flag in distress? Because that's what they're arguing, isn't it? That they're not doing the January 6th thing. So,
well, I don't think they have explicitly said it wasn't a January 6th thing.
Oh, okay. Well, then even so, even if it is a January 6th thing, it doesn't make sense even then.
I think
none of it makes sense.
I think obviously the suspicion among many people is that they are sympathizers with January 6th, but the most generous interpretation by their own excuse is that they were so aggravated by being accused of associated with January 6th. They were kind of like, well, you think I'm a January 6th? I'm going to fly the flag upside down my home for 3 days.
Okay. That showed them.
I suppose. But regardless, it's not good.
No, it's not ideal.
Employees of the court aren't even allowed to have political bumper stickers.
Yeah.
And I just feel like, regardless of whether they support the January 6th riots or were mad at their neighbors, like, is it too much to ask for like a baseline level of professionalism from Supreme Court justices and their immediate family? I'm not accepting it was the wife's fault decision because it was up there long enough. Even if you say, I think she should know better as well, not to bring him into disrepute in such an obvious way when he's ruling on political cases, including ones specifically related to January 6th, including at that exact point in time when they were deciding whether to hear cases about the election.
Yes.
put that aside, it was up long enough that, say she can do whatever she wants, it's still incumbent on him to be like, hey, get that flag down.
Yeah, he can take it down.
Yes, and he's not saying he didn't realize it was because it was there for days.
Yeah.
So I'm not accepting the wife excuse.
No.
It's on him as well.
Yeah.
And I just think Supreme Court justices have like an absurd level of power in America. And I don't think it's too much to ask that they should comport themselves on a level that's better than an average person. I mean, they're saying that they were insulted by these yard signs. Who cares? Be better than them. I mean, for starters, you can ignore them. That's an option. And if it raises to the level where it's genuine harassment, call the police. And they can do it. I mean, I can say from my own personal... I once lived in a place for a few months. I was moving a place for work, and the owners of the home had renovated their home recently, and their neighbors didn't like it. And their neighbors actually put signs in their backyard visible from the room where I was staying in. But they'd like painted, like, you know, fuck you or whatever, I can't remember now, on sheets and hung it up on their heels hoist and left it there for months. And I saw that every day for 4 months. And
Did you hang a flag upside down?
I did not care. You know what I did? I did absolutely nothing. I was like, that's cool, they're crazy. I'm not involved, not engaging, not involved. Neither did, I mean, obviously I was not the permanent resident of the home, but the people living there also quite comfortable to just ignore it. And you think if that's the normal, natural response of everyday people in a more or less everyday context, you would think it should not be beyond a Supreme Court justice to not respond to that kind of behavior with, at worst, affirmation of an insurrection, or at best, trolling. I feel like we don't want trolls on the Supreme Court of the United States.
Yeah. No, I think that's a fair call. I think you're right. I think it's a good point. Why can't he just practice self-restraint? And that's something he never does. He's constantly having to go back at critics, which is a Supreme Court justice is not meant to do. I also think you make a great point with the police. Like, a fuck Trump sign, the police can take that down. A sign which is having to go at you personally, the police can take that down. It's just not necessary to respond.
And if anyone should be of a mind to do things the right way rather than taking the law into their own hands, again, a Supreme Court justice.
Yeah, no, that is a really good call. I mean, because I was thinking to myself, is it possible that I didn't know about the upside down flag thing for a few days, till a little bit of time after January 6th. So is it possible that they didn't know? Maybe, maybe not. I mean, he's more into the January 6 people than I was.
I mean, it's even weirder if they don't know.
Yeah,
like that's
it is. Yeah, I agree.
I mean, if someone's accusing you of being involved in Stop the Steal and you respond with an upside down flag with no knowledge that symbolism is heavily associated with the Stop the Steal people, that's a weird coincidence.
Yeah, no, I agree.
Because what is the thought process that makes you respond to that with an upside down flag?
Yeah, no, I completely agree. I think you're right. I was just trying to give him a benefit of the doubt, trying to think it through. You know, I think you're right.
Which again, like, is not, you know, that lack of integrity is not good enough to, you know, because it seems to me that they're lying. And I mean, at a minimum, it's a distortion to say it was briefly up when it was up for 3 days. And I mean, he's not under oath, but you still think he should be above lying.
Yeah, he should be. I suppose the other question I have is not that I'm saying this is, you know, definitive, but it's just something that's nagging at me is how come we haven't heard about this until now? Because they were fighting. So you would have thought the very first thing the people fighting against Alito would do is take a photo and send it to the press immediately. We're only hearing it now. Now, I've read that they feared reprisals, but they didn't fear reprisals enough to not put up a fuck Trump sign in their front yard and a you're at fault for January 6 sign. So and to call them a C word. So so clearly they're not that worried about reprisals. Wow. And why wouldn't they be worried about reprisals now? What's the difference?
I've thought about that because I know that's the kind of the people who are sort of, I mean, to be fair, even a lot of Republicans in Congress, even Lindsey Graham is like, this is poor judgment. You know, you're not doing well when Lindsey Graham's criticizing your judgment.
I've got the quote. He says his wife was insulted and got mad. Assume that to be true, but he's still a Supreme Court justice. And, you know, people have to realize that moments like that, think it through.
Yeah.
Yes.
Sad to agree. But but the people who are kind of a mind to be skeptical or try and support Alito have raised that question of why is this coming out now? This was 3 years ago or whatever. And it's fine to ask the question, but I thought about it. And I think there are lots of, reasonable explanations for that. I don't know the answer, obviously, because we don't know who it came from. But I think that there are more plausible, reasonable explanations for that than for Alito's side of it. One, you say, oh, they were bold enough to put up fuck Trump signs. We don't know it was those neighbors.
Yeah.
Lots of people live in that block. It could have been a different neighbor who was not involved in the fight directly, but saw it and was like, oh, that's weird. I'm going to take a photo of that. And they might not have wanted to be involved in the dispute. But so, that would explain why they didn't send it at the time. Why now? I don't know. Maybe someone's moved and they're less concerned. Maybe someone is, because they're now on the verge of hearing the January 6 cases, maybe it's just been eating at them all this time and they're finally broken. And they're like, people need to know about this. And they've decided to, take the plunge now. And maybe they're just less scared over time because they've just seen the way, because it was not at all apparent back in, I know it's, a lot of time has passed since then, but in the immediate aftermath, lots of people thought, okay, that was bad, but it's done. Trump's finished. We're all going to move on. So over time, you could see how people who were concerned enough to take a picture and be like, oh, that's messed up and I'm concerned about this, but maybe it's not necessary, might now feel newly concerned enough to want to bring it to people's attention. So I think there are reasons like that, which whether you agree with sending it to the press or not, could plausibly explain why. Because also the counterpoint is what's the conspiracy? It would have been, I think, just as damaging to release it back then as now. So I don't really see the reason to think conspiratorially about it.
Yeah, I wasn't necessarily suggesting conspiracy, but just I take your point.
Because Alito, the main thing is Alito is not denying it.
Yeah,
that it happened.
No, it's true.
So it's the basic facts of the case are not in dispute.
And I didn't have anyone asked you. Do you think he should recuse himself on January 6 related cases?
He definitely won't.
Well, that's clear.
I think the thing for me is I don't think it's realistic to say judges shouldn't have political opinions. Some people frame it that way. Of judges should be neutral. They shouldn't have political opinions. People are going to have opinions. You want judges to know what's happening in the world, and it's not natural to not have a personal opinion. So the question isn't, do they have an opinion? Same with Clarence Thomas. The question isn't, do they have an opinion or not? Do they vote for Trump or not? Are they Republican or Democrat? That's not important if they are able to be professional in the way that they approach cases relating to it. A professional has their personal opinions, but can meaningfully put them aside and engage in the facts of the case, whatever it is before them, and analyze it dispassionately, regardless of what their personal political views are. Some people are capable of doing that. This, to me, is incredibly unprofessional behavior, and I think it's reasonable for people to not have confidence in his judgment off the back of that. Not least because anytime you get training in conflict of interest in any work context, it's not just about a direct conflict of interest, but the perception of a conflict of interest. Yes. There's clearly a perception of a conflict of interest here, and it's not, I think, healthy for the country to have judgments happening like this, where there are legitimate reasons for people to feel that he is not professional in the way that he's engaging in these topics, and legitimate questions about whether he can put his personal opinions aside. So I think by pure legal and ethical logic, let's put it this way. If there was a judge who was flying a Monsanto flag in their front yard and then they had to adjudicate on a case about Monsanto, you'd probably feel that was not appropriate.
You probably would. That's a fine analogy.
And so if someone's putting a January 6 flag, for lack of a better term, in their yard, I probably don't want them ruling on a January 6 case.
Look, honestly, I was actually edging towards saying, my position until you just said that then was that my position was he is clearly unfit to be a Supreme Court justice.
Yeah, just in general.
He is the worst Supreme Court justice that I can remember, at least in my adult life. He's an absolute disgrace.
Yeah, he should recuse himself from everything.
Yeah. If there were grounds for impeachment, I don't know what they would be, but if there were grounds for impeachment, I would vote yes, yes, yes. He was a massive mistake, but I wasn't necessarily sure that this was grounds for recusal in itself. But Your Monsanto flag example has actually brought me around. You're right. Judge Monsanto, I would not want to be my judge in the Monsanto case. You're absolutely correct. And so I think that whether it technically meets the precise wording definition of grounds for recusal or not, I do think he should recuse for exactly the reasons you just gave.
Glad I brought you around.
Well done. No, you honestly did. I was literally about to say the opposite. You brought me around, so well done. Okay, now we are 25 minutes past the time that you asked me for us to finish, so I'm not going to do the last topic with you. I'll save that for Bill on Monday. I assume you're okay with that?
Yep.
Yes. Okay. So thank you so much, as always, Melina, and thank you for filling for Dave. I think everyone will agree, capable replacement. Watch out, Dave. And before we go, I should note that Bill Wyman is going to be at I believe, if he doesn't stab me in the back, going to be at the beginning of next week. I don't know if it's Monday or Tuesday, so there will be a PEP then, and then Dr. Dave will be back at the end of next week. So we're going to have a few, every now and then, we're going to have a few 2 PEP weeks in the next little while. So I hope that's not too much PEP. Can you handle it? We'll find out. Till then, thank you, Melina.
Thank you.
Stay peppy.